Welcome, patient travelers. Set your shoulders down and let the morning open slowly. A pale chill lies on the valley, and you hear water somewhere below the travertine shelf, ticking through fissures like a hidden clepsydra. Your palms taste of lime and iron. A crow lifts off the quarry rim, and the day begins with a hammer's first clear syllable. You stand in the quarries of Tibur, today's Tivoli, where the hill bleeds a stone Romans trust with their weight and their pride. The blocks here are not marble's cool vanity. They are travertine, warm-boned, full of little voids where water once lived, tough enough to shoulder an empire's crowds. Under Vespasian and then Titus, this stone will travel west along the Aniene and the Tiber to a drained lake in the middle of Rome, and there it will learn a new name in the mouths of strangers: the Flavian Amphitheatre, the Colosseum. A foreman lifts his hand, 2 fingers, the sign to begin. You and the older men have already cut the trenches around, effaced the length of 2 mules, narrow channels pecked with point chisels and the steel-toothed scalpello a denti. Wooden wedges sleep in a bucket, swelling in river water. The rhythm is old: pick to bruise the line, chisel to clean it, wedge to whisper pressure into the crack you drew yesterday. No shouting is needed. The stone answers or it doesn't, and either way, you will hear. Tools sit arranged on a plank the way a priest lays out vessels: point and tooth chisels, a broad flat chisel for the last proud millimeters, a dolabra whose twin temperaments, axe and adze, can shame impatience, and a mallet with one face scarred where it met the world too hard. A line coated with red ochre, the master's linea rubra, marks the measure that came from the city last week, a standard module to fit the amphitheater's stacked arcades, where Tuscan, Ionic, and Corinthian orders will climb like a grammar lesson written in stone. You do not say those names aloud. You feel them in the cut, the way one block must become the neighbor of a curve. The first block lets go before the sun clears the ridge. The wedges complain, the crack moves like a fish under ice, and then the world changes weight with a thud you feel in your teeth. Dust blooms. Someone laughs once, quick, almost guilty, and the foreman's fingers fold. Stillness. Check the face. Where the fracture ran clean, the stone shows a glinting, sugary surface. Where it wandered, you will spend extra hours dressing. You map the faults with a fingernail and a wetted thumb, tasting calcium on your knuckle like a penny. Nothing here is wasted. Even the broken corners will find their way into concrete, opus cementitium, in vaults you haven't seen yet. By mid-morning, the treadwheel crews are awake. The big wooden drums stand over the quarry lip like patient animals, their slatted treads smelling of tar and old rope. A pair of men walk inside each wheel, leaning into a steady climb that never arrives, turning their labor into lift. Below, iron Lewises bite temporary mouths into the blocks. Clamps and slings, hemp polished by use and beeswax, gather the stone in a web that looks fragile until the rope sings. Vitruvius, the old master of building, wrote about these machines long before your birth. His words ride in men's memories and in the joinery of oak and ash. The block rises. Everyone watches the first centimeters as if staring at a newborn's rib cage. The foreman's plumb bob steadies, the rope's hum settles into one note, and the sled takes the weight. Oxen snort clouds into the air, bells faint against the scrape of runners. When the team leans, you feel it in your knees. The track to the loading yard is sanded to cheat friction. A boy throws water from a bucket to quiet the dust. The splash smells faintly of sulfur where the quarry spring wounds the rock. You work without counting hours. The sun climbs. A strip of shade rotates with the wheel's rim. Someone's wife brings a leather flask of sour wine and a twist of olives and cheese. The talk, when there is talk, skates on safe surfaces. News of a bridge repair, a mason who broke a finger and swore by every minor god on the Aventine. No one talks politics here. They do not need to. Everyone can read a new emperor and the speed of orders and the number of scribes on a site. Spoils from Judea, the elders say, are building this amphitheater. The claim is common in the city's gossip and on the lips of men who count coins. Whether captive hands cut stone here or not, money moves the way rivers do, gathering all smaller streams. After the break, you dress faces. The point chisel opens, the tooth chisel levels, the flat chisel finishes, and the mallet's weight becomes a metronome. Your wrists learn to love. You chase a true right angle along a corner with a small square, guard it like a candle in wind, and arrive at the quiet satisfaction of 2 planes meeting with a hair's breadth of light. On the hidden beds, you pick shallow channels for iron clamps that will one day be poured in with molten lead, a secret wedding of metals and stone that no spectator will ever see unless centuries grow cruel. Marks go on. The quarries tally, incised letters, a numeral, will let the overseers match crews to outputs when blocks reach Rome. Your guild leaves a sign only the initiated recognize, half pride and half insurance. The state leaves a different sign, stamped in bureaucracy, a wax seal on a tablet with a neat list of sizes. Between these two marks, you exist, not nameless, not exactly remembered. Late light angles across the quarry and turns the travertine honey pale. From here, you can almost imagine the gash in Rome where Nero's artificial lake lies half drained. The ground tamped and measured, the ovals plotted with a surveyor's groma. You can almost see the amphitheatre's first course, ring the mud like a bracelet closing. But imagination is not the work. The work is the next clean strike, the next block that leaves this hill without tears. As the oxen take up the last sled of the day, a runner arrives from the city yard, breath tight, wax tablet in hand. The message is short enough to fit under a thumbnail and heavy enough to alter the week. The footprint is set. The first travertine foundations can be laid. In the fading light, you understand that the quarry's slow, patient sentences are about to become a public speech. Tomorrow, the stone will move. Dawn oils the tools in a thin gold and lifts the breath from men's mouths like small banners. Before any block leaves Tibur, hands speak to stone in a shorthand older than any order tablet. Lines, letters, cuts that are both prayer and paperwork. The foreman draws a cord through red ochre and snaps a straight blush across a newly dressed face, fixing the module the city demands. Beside it you carve a mark that is yours, a tight ligature of 2 letters learned from the man who taught you. Not signature as poets boasted, but a breadcrumb for accountants and overseers, proof that your crew's labor exists in the sum of the day. Guilds, the collegiae, hold men like a net holds fish, loosely, collectively, with rules woven through. In Rome, they'll write of fabbri, carpenters, lapidarii, stonecutters, structores, masons, each with patrons among the gods, Minerva for craft, Hercules for strength, and patrons among the living too, where politics requires a different gravity. Here, the rules are simpler and stricter. Tools are to be kept sharp. Measurements are to be kept true. Quarrels that rise with the sun must set before the noon bell from the Tibur temple. A boy becomes a man when his square stays honest in his master's hand. Fines are paid in copper and reputation. The oath is not theater, it remembers men who cut corners and watched corners cut them back. You run a fingertip over yesterday's tooth chisel striations, those close, combed lines that hold the light like brushed flax, and then lean in to nick a bedding channel for a clamp. Most of the world will never see it, a shallow mortise near the edge, waiting for an iron dog to bite 2 blocks together. When it happens in the city, molten lead will pour between metal and stone, a soft third body making peace between harder ones. Vitruvius advised where to hide such joints. Old wheels and fresh backs will carry the advice into the amphitheatre's bones. When later centuries grow hungry, they will sniff out iron and lead and pry them free, leaving the scars that tell you now where the trust once lay. Wax tablets travel faster than oxen. A scribe from the Flavian yard arrives with his reed pen tucked like a dagger and unrolls the news on a board. The foundation trench has met good ground across the ellipse. The mensores have set their pegs and strings. The first courses of travertine want specific sizes, numbered by course and position. The letters are neat, the numbers Roman. There is nothing poetic about CXX7 Gratisfur Angulus. There is everything necessary. You copy the codes with a care that makes the wax shine, then translate them into the quarry's dialect. Incised numerals, a painted smear that will flake but not before it has reached the river yard, a tally notch on the sled's beam. Around you the marks multiply like a census of intentions. On a rough boss left proud for lifting, a nub that gives a crane its bite, you scratch the small forked sign of your team. At the edge, where the hammer bit first, a shallow check mark shows where the wedge ran. In a corner, almost joking, someone traces a Hercules knot and touches the wood of his mallet. Not piety exactly, a superstition with a worker's calluses. Official signs come too, a stamped lead tag the overseer ties to a sling, a clay bulla embossed with the quarry's seal, a chalked numeral from a comptroller who trusts chalk more than men. Pay lives and marks as well. The magistrate's agent counts outputs by crew sign and course number. not by how tired a man looks when he drinks. In towns where papyrus is rare and memory is cheaper, a tally on wood and the witness of a foreman decide whether a man's wife can buy oil without watering it. Rates vary. You have heard numbers on other sites, and you have heard them contradicted. Skilled hands earn more. The dangerous wheel pays more. Rain pays nothing when the quarry floods. Grain rations and contracted fees drift through conversation like gnats. Always there, rarely caught. What is certain is this: the marks you cut will one day echo in a chalk line on a wall in Rome, and from chalk to coin is a path men will walk or stumble. You take a moment to study tool talk in stone. The point chisel leaves starbursts where it bruised. The tooth chisel combs those stars into furrows. The flat chisel quiets the field into a skin that will take a fine bed. On the arris, the edge you will never forgive yourself for rounding, you pass a whetstone once, twice, so the light slides like water. You make a tiny aris chamfer on the hidden face to avoid spalling when the weight comes on. No spectator will notice this. Every craftsperson will. The amphitheatre will be a stage for crowds and emperors, but its first audience is men who judge a joint by the shadow it refuses to cast. Talk turns, as it always does, to who really builds Rome. Some say the captives from the Judean war will do the hauling and the hardest labor. Others shrug toward the river and say the city feeds whoever shows up with shoulders. In truth, the work is braided. Contractors, redemptores, winning slices of the project, state crews assigned by office, hired day laborers, specialists with guild ties, supervised convicts on other sites, and yes, captives, where the empire's cruelty intersects with logistics. You cannot swear who will stand on which rope tomorrow. You can swear that when a block moves, it moves because hands and machines make a contract with gravity and keep it. At noon, a master sets down his mallet, draws his guild knife, and scores a small fish on the underside of a bedding face, the curve so shallow you feel it more than see it. The gesture comes from his father's father, they say, before the family walked from the Sabine hills to Tibur. It will die when the last man who remembers it dies. You think, not for the first time, that the amphitheatre will store more than games and shouts. It will store habits and humor, oaths and shortcuts, all petrified into courses that would crumble if you tried to extract them. Afternoon leans toward transport. The sled runners are greased with sheep fat. A plank road drops from the quarry lip to the river yard. Two tread wheels creak like patient giants as they nurse a particularly proud block onto the sled. The suspensura, a rig of beams, slings, and prayers, keeps the world from deciding the block belongs to it again. A boy walks beside, watching the Lewis teeth, whispering a count as if numbers could persuade the rope to remain rope. The oxen master clicks his tongue. The first meter is always the hardest. Then wood begins to tell wood its old story. Down on the Aniene, rafts come together from timbers that dream of being roofs, broad, buoyant, ready to learn the river's grammar of eddy and rock. Men lash the raft's spine with cords, set crib timbers so the travertine will not punch through when the current speaks, and wedge the first block with oak cheeks. The raft shifts once, everyone pauses. The foreman's hand hovers in a flat plane, still. You wet the travertine's face with a palm and leave a streak that dries in the sun. That little line is not a mark that anyone will count. It says only that this surface met your skin. A last set of tokens. The tablet receives the course code and crew sign. The bulla receives the imprint. The boy with ink-stained fingers writes a duplicate on a scrap because he trusts his own memory, least of all. Above, the quarry face is already half a promise to the next block. Below, the river curls its green lip around the raft and makes a suggestion that becomes movement. The marks you made at Tibur are about to enter a wider sentence, one written in water. The road leaves Tibur like a sentence leaves a mouth, measured, rutted, sure of its listener. At dawn, the Via Tiburtina glints with crushed flint and pale dust, wheel ruts filled with yesterday's shade. Oxen lean into their yokes, wooden bows creaking, bells arguing softly with the morning. A carter walks barefoot beside the sled to feel the slope through his bones. He says it saves wheels, but really it saves his heart from the panic of not knowing. In the hedges, wild fennel tilts its little sons. In the ditches, last night's frogs finish their stories. Stone moves when animals agree with men about direction. But the road is only the first grammar. Water is the second. And today it has the better verbs. Down at the Aniene's bank, rafts wait like blunt-winged insects. their bodies a language of beam and lash. The travertine lies in the raft's gut on crib timbers, chalked by oak cheeks that smell green when a wedge bites. Rope loops everything to everything else. Raft to pole, pole to ring, ring to the boatman's shoulders and the certainty of his stance. He is a man of the river guild, a nauta Anienus, sun-browned and pinched where the wind makes knives of winter air. He spits to test the wind, grins when it lands on his own foot, and calls the Aniene by her diminutive as if she were both cousin and co-conspirator. You step aboard to ride the first reach. The river takes weight like a careful mule. It flinches around the raft's corners and then accepts them. Poles bite gravel in slow, juddering thrusts. A boy with a paddle watches the block's Lewis scars as if muscles could will iron to keep learning its purpose. The foreman stands at the forward crib with his auger tucked under his arm like a scepter, tapping the stone now and then in private love. Up on the bank, the road keeps its parallel promise. Carts keeping pace, drivers swapping insults and figs, the trudging patience of land against the liquid patience of water. The Aniene runs to the Tibur under stone arches and wooden ribs. At the confluence north of Rome, water marries water in a way that looks simple until you ride it. The seam between rivers is a moving, braided thing that tugs the raft's nose and asks rude questions of balance. The boatman plants his pole, braces, and shouts one syllable that means now. The boy throws his weight the other way. The foreman goes still as a carved god. You feel the hull's mind choose a path, and suddenly the world is wider, browner, more muscular. The Tiber takes little interest in your plans. He is in love with the sea and resents delays. Downstream, the city's smell reaches you before the city's stones do. Yeast and smoke, olive pressings, hides and tannery pits near the bank, pitch simmering in a cauldron, fish deciding between this life and next. Towers begin to pull the horizon into teeth. Bridges arrive like punctuation, Pons Neronianus's footprint up near the gardens, Pons Milvius stout on its piers, Pons Aemilius, the old stone bridge the people now joke as Ponte Roto when floods bite it, leaning its weight into the current. At each span the river pinches its shoulders, and boatmen become mathematicians with wet hands. Angle, thrust, clearance, all under the impatient stare of toll collectors and children with dried reeds for trumpets. Guild signs flicker along the bank. The Nauta Tiberini, Tiber boatmen, work shallows with competence that looks like laziness if you've never seen a hull kiss a sandbar in anger. The Caudicarii, the raftisan known for hawsers as thick as a man's wrist, bellow greetings. Nobody answers because everyone is already answering with work. A small shrine to Tiberinus sits under a fig, its plaster thumbed by greasy petitions. On a platform, a treadwheel crane turns, two men inside walking their endless small climb. The wheel groans, the sling rises, and a block as big as a cow lifts clean, dripping river in the sun. Proof that weight can be taught to move. Not everything floats to Rome. Some blocks take the road because they are needed yesterday, or because the river has grown petulant with late summer shallows. Carts grind into town like punctuation you can hear. On the Via Tiburtina's milestones, the numbers fall toward zero, toward the city's heart. Each stone a quiet boast of distance, measured when time was a different kind of money. You pass shrines blackened by old lamps, villas that pretend not to listen to the road, a brick kiln working its red alchemy for the city's insatiable appetite. Mule hooves beat a line you could hum. At the Emporium, the river's commercial belly south of the Aventine, order manifests as architecture. The Porticus Aemilia sprawls in long concrete bays like a sequence of ribs. Horea, warehouses, breathe cool grain smell through their shutters. Winches hang with tar-black ropes thick as eels. Porters carry loads yoked across their shoulders with a step that wastes nothing. A man with an inked tablet argues with another man whose argument is a pair of enormous hands. The chalk on boards lists arrivals not as poetry, but as money. Olive oil from Batika, wheat from Africa, stone from Tibur. A taxman, a portator, watches everything with the mild gaze of someone who believes in numbers more than gods. Your raft noses in against fenders of bound brush. The foreman's plumb bob swings once, twice, and then steadies as the sling takes the block. The crane's axle sings a note of wood over bone. When the travertine clears the gunwale, you feel the river's exhale through your boots. Men with pikes guide the swing, so no corner bites anyone foolish enough to be thinking of dinner already. The block comes down on a waiting wagon, with a sound like a door closing on a very large room. The road into the Campus Martius and across to the drained lake is alive with the logistics of a state that has discovered spectacle as policy. Teams of oxen line nose to tail. Grooms toss chaff. A boy scuttles under a yoke with a rag and a boldness that will teach him pain someday. The city's voices braid into a single rope. Vendors promising improbable spices, a coppersmith beating a bowl back to confession, a water seller rattling tin cups, someone somewhere laughing like they're owed it. You pass the ruins of Nero's gardens, the skin of his golden house glimmering like a rumor where plaster catches sun. Men point and don't say the name out loud. Vespasian's new order wants a different center of gravity. The site itself is a wound turned into a bowl. Survey pegs map the ellipse, their strings humming when a breeze tests geometry. The foundation trench has been dug to good ground, its sides showing the city in a cross-section. Fill and ash, old brick shards, a coin someone already winked from the wall, clay that smells of secrets. The mensories, measurers, work with gromas and cords, setting the beds where your stone will lie. On a trestle table, a map scratched in wax shows courses and angles, like a game board whose rules are weight and weather. You stand a moment and listen. The city's sound falls away into a new sound of beginnings. A wheel turns, a rope clucks in a pulley. The foreman clears his throat and says nothing worth remembering except that it's time. The first travertine foundation block comes forward between shouting that isn't anger and silence that isn't peace. It swings, inches, kisses its chalk lines, and lands with a solidity that persuades even doubters. Men grin with half their faces. Someone touches the stone as if it were a friend's shoulder. From the river to the trench, all the languages have converged at last. Road, water, rope, chalk, the grammar of trust. The block settles. A mason kneels with his trowel and brushes the joint as tenderly as a mother's palm. Dust rises and tastes faintly of egg, lime, thyme. Above the trench, a second sling is already hurrying across the sky. Morning fog lifts off the dug earth in slow veils, and the chalk lines glint as if dew had learned geometry. Calm begins with silence. The site holds its breath while the mensories, measurers, reset their instruments at the oval's edge. Agroma's crossed arms hang like a small windmill, its plumb lines steady as thoughts that have been checked twice. This is not a rectangle a boy could square by eye. This is an ellipse, and the city has never seen one this large cut into its own belly. You watch the survey master set 2 stout stakes at a calculated distance, the rumored method every apprentice whispers about, but few get to witness. The foci of the oval. A loop of cord slips over both, taut as a bowstring. A scribe walks the loop with a stylus on a board at first, then with a pin tipping a line in the raw earth, keeping the cord's tension constant so the tip can only trace the curve where the sum of distances to the 2 foci stays the same. It is a trick, both simple and profound, the kind of knowledge that makes men feel taller without making them foolish. Not every scholar agrees the Romans lay their ellipses like this. Not every builder cares. The result is what matters, a curve without arrogance, reproducing itself cleanly no matter where the stylus starts. Pegs bite the line. The oval grows in teeth until the trench's lip looks domesticated, almost polite. Scribbles in wax become timber templates laid on trestles, the profiles of foundations and walls cut in scale so foremen can talk without shouting. The major axis will measure nearly 190 paces in one direction, the minor roughly 155 in the other. The arena inside the ring will be an elongated eye, about 87 by 55, big enough for a famine of sand and a flood of spectacle. 80 entrances will pierce the podium, numbered in paint and memory. The emperor will have his own route like a vein protected under skin. The orders, Tuscan, Ionic, Corinthian, are already argued in kitchens where no one has ever seen a fluted drum up close. Beneath argument there is dirt, and dirt has its own moods. The Lake Nero once coaxed into this basin left clays that remember water with inconvenient loyalty. In test pits, the soil shows its layers like a cut cake. Fill, ash, old rubbish, patches of firmer silt where time forgot to be sloppy. In places, engineers decide the foundation trench must go deeper, down to stubborn strata that will not betray a wall after a winter of rain. The figure that travels mouth to mouth, 12 men deep, 30 paces wide for the main ring, swells or shrinks with the boasting. What is certain, because you watch it, is that the ring is monstrous, a belt of concrete and stone that will hold the city's weight without complaining. Lime kilns near the site exhale white breath night and day. Slaked in pits, mixed with pozzolanic ash ferried from the volcano country, the paste becomes a slow miracle. Opus caementicium, concrete, pouring like thick porridge around chunks of tuff and travertine that act as coarse aggregate. In boxy timber formwork, the ring's first pores find their level, the carpenter's spirit levels, the libra with its water, the chorobates with its long belly, deciding what flat means when everything around wants to tilt. Where the foundation meets the outer wall, revetments of travertine blocks will form a skin the concrete can trust, bound by iron dogs and lead that keep secrets better than men do. Your cruise blocks, Tibur's honeybone travertine, arrive in steady procession, their marks read off by a clerk who could recite numbers in his sleep. The first courses go down on lime mortar troweled to a thin religiousness, beds brushed clean, a rise is protected from knocks by a superstition that is really physics. Between courses, the masons leave narrow voids where lead will later travel, molten rivers filling around clamps that stitch stone to stone. On the curve, each block is a trapezoid kissed into shape by a mallet and a flat chisel. The joint face is dressed so tight that a hair has to thin itself to pass. Tension rises in ways only builders notice. A crane leg sinks a finger's width into softer ground, and a foreman cusses the past for leaving a lake where he wants a floor. The wheel crews walk their endless hill, sweat tracking down ribs that seem carved for it. A carter turns his wagon too close to the trench, and a wheel thinks about a long lesson before the wheelman persuades it back to school. A survey peg disappears under someone's enthusiastic foot, and for an hour, the world is made of apologies. Centerpiece then, setting the datum stone, the block that makes the curve honest because everything else will listen to it. It is nothing to look at, just another ons of travertine with a face the sun will never touch again once the next course smothers it. But men gather with the hush they bring to the first slice of a loaf in a hungry house. The plumb bob steadies. The foreman draws his finger along the ochred line as if reading a verse. The crane sighs, lowers, breathes again. A mason kneels to squint into the joint the way a doctor squints into a wound. The tap-tap-tap along the upper aris is a psalm you feel in your teeth. And then the block settles into that universal past tense. Done. And a dozen shoulders relax at once. What rises above will ride on this decision. Radial walls, like the spokes of a mighty wheel, will leap from the foundation ring toward the arena's edge, their vaults carrying stairs and corridors that later tongues will call vomitoria because they let crowds pour in and out without choking. The outer shell will lift in arcades, the orders marching around the oval as if grammar had learned to walk. Tuscan, plain, muscular, at the base. Ionic, spiraled, attentive, above. Corinthian, leafed and confident, at the third tier. And at the top, in the attic, brackets for masts that will one day hold a sail big enough to teach shade to behave. Between the skeleton and the skin, concrete will pour into ribs and rings, learning the oval as if it were the most natural thing a liquid could want to become. Brick stamps will date each batch. Kiln smoke will scribe a separate history along the sky. And everywhere small decisions, how much lime to a basket of ash, whether to add potsherds to temper, how to turn a rough quarry face into a bearing surface in one afternoon, will write their marginalia in the building's margins. Centuries from now, when cracks talk and restorers argue with ghosts, these whispers will decide whose voices are louder. Late in the day, a messenger arrives from the yard by the Aventine, where the larger cranes are assembled, the tread wheels big as rooms. His tablet says their mast sections are ready to walk across the city, their guy lines coiled like snakes dreaming of ladders. The outer arcades cannot rise without them. The stone wants height and persuasion in equal measure. Men glance toward the street as if tall machines could already be seen poking up above roofs like curious animals. On the trench's rim, a child balanced on a basket watches the curve grow and counts pegs without knowing why the number matters. Behind her, the city shifts its weight, sensing a new center forming, as surely as a sleeper senses someone sitting on the bed. The footprint is fixed. The bones know their future even if men pretend not to. Somewhere beyond the walls, a set of wheels as tall as a house creak once and begin to move. Before sun finds the upper stories of Rome, a different constellation rises at ground level. Masts, booms, and wheels as tall as houses, each guide to the earth as if the city had grown a small forest of disciplined trees. Calm begins in wood. Carpenters stroke long timbers, listening for knots that might hide a treachery. Pins are cut to the same temper as oaths. Iron shoes bite massed feet. Crossheads seat like shoulders finding their joints after a long sleep. The air smells of tar, raw hemp, and the faint honey of planed fur. Signals are agreed upon before any weight stirs. The foreman's right hand open, walk, right hand closed, hold, 2 taps on the boom, down, 3, up, a flat palm slicing across the throat, silence. Voices help, but wind steals vowels and returns them late. The rope listens better to rhythm than grammar. Boys carry wedges like priests carry oil, ready to still a shimmy under a strut or hush a plank that has found a new way to complain. Rome did not invent lifting, but she turned it into policy. Today the site gathers every trick builder's trust. Simple windlasses with their horizontal drums work close to the foundations, snubbing lines around oak that bleeds resin when the strain climbs. Beyond them sit the big tread wheels, their slatted interiors ready to teach 2 men how to walk without moving. Vitruvius described versions of these, trispastos and polyspastos, block and tackle rigs that multiply a hand's intention into a ton's obedience. Names matter less than practice. More sheaves mean more rope, and gentler arguments with gravity. Fewer sheaves mean speed where weight permits it. The crews choose, and then they live with the choice in their calves. Tension rises with the first rehearsal. A dummy load, a dead tree trunk waterlogged until it believes it is stone, hangs from a sling while the wheeled crew tests the boom's swagger. Guy lines murmur, taught to converse with gusts instead of panic at them. A carpenter watches the masthead where sheaves blink like dark eyes, his own eyes measuring heat in the axle by how quickly a spit of wet sounds when it touches iron. A man at the tail rope leans back into a stance generations taught him. Feet apart, heels to earth, the line a living thing across his back. The dummy rises, swings, and for a breath the whole staging seems to consider whether it wants to be theater or disaster. Centerpiece then. The first real lift into the air that will become arcade. The block is a dressed pier stone, trapezoid in plan. Its arise is protected with leather guards so no corner learns sorrow on the way up. A Lewis is set in a purpose-cut mortise, 3 iron jaws that kiss inward as the load comes on, and the hole is corked with a wooden wedge so grit cannot talk to the joint. The sling embraces the block like a mother who pretends she trusts a stranger. The foreman steps back until his plumb bob forgets to swing. He holds up his open hand. The wheel crew begins to walk. A tread wheel has its own liturgy. Step, breathe, a soft drumbeat of soles on slats and breath against dry air. Dry air. From the ground it looks almost gentle. Inside the barrel, it is a hill written within a circle, never cresting, never letting the body enjoy descent. The axle turns. The rope tightens. All at once the block remembers the world is deeper than lying down. The boom sings, a low wooden vowel. Guy lines answer with the faintest thrumming, like insects too disciplined to be called flies. The wind sniffs at the arrangement and decides not to argue. Half a man's height, 1 man's height, 2. The crane captain gestures with 2 fingers, a notation for swing that every crew has, a dialect of wrists. The tailors ease the block away from the mast foot, so it does not scrape the world with its pride. On the scaffold, masons step into a dance they would never call a dance. One with a hand on the plumb, one with eyes on the chalked Aris line, one with a wooden drift ready to kiss the stone when it is almost home. Nobody looks at the crowd that has accumulated outside the rope, women with pitchers, a butcher wiping hands on his apron, a boy stretching his neck like a goose. Spectacle is for later, precision is for now. A gust arrives late from the Aventine, the same way gossip sometimes arrives late from the Palatine, and the block answers with a slow pendulum. For a moment, the world is an abacus. Men as beads, weight as the crossbar, every decision sliding. The captain's hand goes flat. The wheel crew freeze mid-step, a paradox only experience can teach. Tailors pay out 2 fists of slack, then take 1 back. The boom obeys the new story. The pendulum's arc dies as if a scribe had blotted it with sand. Bring it down, just there. The last hands are bare. Leather kills feel, skin reports truth. Fingers become feathers, judging by tremor and warmth more than by sight. A mason kneels nose near the bed joint, his breath stirring lime dust into a private weather. He calls for water, only a sprinkle, to keep the mortar honest. Another taps the upper Aris with the flat of his chisel. Tiny, testing kisses. The sound is not music exactly, but every ear waits for the pitch that proves even support. The foreman lowers his plumb until the cord kisses the chalk at 2 points, then nods. The nod men trust with wages and sleep. Down. The stone's voice changes at the last thumb width, a lower register that speaks of responsibility. The wheel slows. Footfalls decrescendo. The sling flexes as gravity takes back what was borrowed. A joint disappears into itself. A hairline that water will try to learn for centuries and mostly fail to. One tap, another, and then silence. Men do not cheer, they exhale. Someone wipes a thumb across the Lewis hole, pleased with how clean the iron's bite was. The cork goes back in as if modesty mattered to stone. Around the successful lift, the site resumes its ordinary anxiety. A windlass crew argues about the number of turns left under load on a pin. A carpenter replumbs a post and finds his bubble is a liar. A scribe redrafts his tally when a cartload of bricks arrives, stamped from a kiln he did not expect today. A boy on a scaffold leans too far and is corrected by fingers that grab his belt in time. No one yells, because fear can teach louder than instruction. Far off, kilns cough, and a lime cart loses a little of its breath to the road. Honest uncertainties walk in daylight. How many men per wheel today, with this humidity furrowing rope? Which sheave needs new grease? Does the mast want another guy line before afternoon breezes begin to paw at the flank of the site? A veteran lifts the coil and feels it. Hemp holds secrets in weight and smell. When it starts to taste briny and stiff, it is remembering the sea too much. He orders a splice. A boy will sit with marlinspike and patience, unlaying and relaying thread until the old and the new shake hands without noticing the difference. When the lift is done, the block sits where arcades intend to grow like ribs from a spine. The crew eats standing, a heel of bread gone friendly with garlic, a wedge of pecorino, a swallow of wine turned good by thirst. They do not admire their work. They appraise it, a different verb. The boom is reset by a breath's width to keep the next stone from teaching the last one, regret. Evening shadows stretch long enough to imagine arches where only ambitions now stand. A gull drifts above the yard like a curious foreigner. Somewhere, a trumpet mutters from a barracks. A faint, orderly clatter announces a file of additional wheels rolling in from the Aventine yard, taller yet, with mastheads carved with little faces for luck. Tomorrow, the air will learn the curve of the first arcade. Dawn is cool enough that breath shows, and the timber frames do too, tall ribs of centering rising from the scaffold like a grove caught mid-bow. Calm begins with layout. Carpenters bump shoulder to shoulder along the line, holding a curved wooden template, the dima, against plumbed posts, translating chalk to oak, oak to air. The arch they trace is not a guess. Its radius lives on a rod scribed with tiny knife nicks, a portable memory that keeps the curve honest from bay to bay. Below, the pier stones set yesterday pretend to have always been there. Above, the sky waits to be taught how to bear weight. No arch is born without a floor to rest on, so the crew teaches itself patience with wedges. The centering rises piece by piece, twin ribs joined by ledgers, knee braced to resist the shy tremor that runs through even the bravest timber when a gust tests the site. A carpenter taps a wedge until the rib hums a note he trusts. Another checks the crown with a plumb that touches a pencil mark, like a kiss, and hangs there, undecided, then decides in your favor. In the dusted light you can see the geometry, springing line to crown, impost to keystone, drawn not in ink but in offcuts and footprints. A mason clears his throat and the talk turns to stone. The impost blocks, those square-shouldered stones that will carry the arch's first ambition, lie dressed and labeled, arises guarded by leather, bed faces combed by tooth chisel to a hairline that mortar will love. Travertine answers the question of weight with its own question. Where does the force want to go? And the answer is written in how the springers are cut. One face trued to sit on the impost, the other plain to receive the first voussoir. Lime mortar waits interbs, a slow cream mixed yesterday from slaked lime and sand. For joints this fine, they keep it lean and clean, trusting stone more than paste. Tension rises with the first setting. The treadwheel turns, the sling tightens, the impost hovers, and then sighs onto a bed brushed so clean you could eat from it. A mason's thumb tests the squeeze out, too fat, and you lose truth, too thin, and the joint will gossip in frost. A drift and mallet persuade the block to remember the line it promised in the yard. Across the bay, a surveyor sighting along a taut cord raises 2 fingers, an agreed sign that the heiress is walking straight. The second impost follows, and now there is the space between, an emptiness that already feels like a shape. Centerpiece. The arch itself learning to exist. A boy passes the template to the stone bench. The master lays it against the first voussoir to check the cut, the bevel whispering under the blade's edge. The stone is a trapezoid in plan, its joints angled so gravity will teach each neighbor loyalty. On the centering, a bed of thin laths receives the stones like a gentle hand. Wedges stand ready to tune the fit by copper's widths. The first voussoir rises, swings, touches the centering, and rests. Then its partner on the far side, because arches believe in symmetry more than superstition does. Tap, tap, listen, tap. The sound over wood is a different note than over stone. The crew reads it like a line of figures. Block by block the curve climbs. Dust turns fragrant when a mason flicks a brush across a bed. Wet lime smells faintly of eggs and ocean and time. Each stone's upper arise takes 2 soft kisses from a mallet to settle its mind. The joints are staggered across the ring course, so no seam runs like a crack invitation. A scribe kneels to note which crew set, which bay. The politics of credit is built quietly into the politics of trust. Outside the rope, a handful of onlookers invent private histories for what they're seeing. Inside, the language is weight and cord length, rise and span, and the old rule that nothing new is allowed to be cleverer than the loads it must carry. Halfway up, the curve begins to tell back its own story. You can feel it in the centering, how the weight finds the posts and the wedges, ask for a thumb's attention. A breeze shoulders in from the Aventine and tests the rising ribs. The guy lines on the big crane murmur their disinterest. The foreman rests his palm on the crown of the centering, as if it were a feverish child, and then nods to proceed. A runner brings news from the kiln. Today's lime slaked hot. Keep water near. Someone cracks a joke about hair and eyebrows. Everyone smiles without wasting lungs. The last 2 stones before the keystone are the craft's quiet boast. Too thick, and the crown will spit. Too thin, and the keystone will sit like a guest at the wrong table. The template is consulted, then ignored, then consulted again, the way men treat advice that has already saved them twice. The foreman's plumb line kisses the centering's crown mark and hangs, finally, in a truth everyone believes together. He wipes the cord between finger and thumb to remind it to remain string, not myth. Now the keystone rises. It is not much to look at. Just another wedge of travertine with a fault rejected and a face loved, but every eye argues with gravity on its behalf. The treadwheel sings its barrel hymn. Tailors ease the lines so the nose of the stone can find the place where the world wants it most. The centering holds its breath. The keystone settles, a slow marriage ring sliding home. Taps along the ring read like punctuation. Comma, comma, full stop. For a heartbeat nothing moves, and then the arch admits it has always existed and only needed men to notice. Stillness becomes applause in workman's language. Little grins, a brush run once along a joint, the indulgence of a longer drink from a leather bottle. But suspense remains. The centering must come out. Not yet. Mortars want time to greet stone, but today you can walk under the timber ribs and imagine the shadow the arch will throw. A mason squints up and mutters a number to himself. The ratio of rise to span that Romans favor, honest and practical. There were other ways to draw the curve, a true semicircle, a flatter segmental, but the Romans love the round arch because it loves them back with forgiving thrusts and generous tolerances. Honest cautions stand in daylight. Some restorers centuries hence will argue whether these earliest bays used heavier tuff in the inner rings, with travertine kept for facework. Others will point to surviving stones that show travertine throughout at the arcades. Today your crew sees the mix, travertine where eyes will travel, concrete and brick where mass and speed matter more than shimmer. You file the thought under truths one learns by lifting, not under rhetoric. By afternoon, a second bay is crowned, and a third is ready for its keystone tomorrow. Sun warms the centering until the pitch in the joints smells sweet. A carpenter slides a thin wedge here, draws another there, keeping the ribs honest as the weight begins to settle. A boy runs a damp cloth across a chalk line that has outlived its moment. On the scaffold, a mason rubs a thumb along a carved slot that will later receive an iron clamp hidden in shadow. With molten lead, it will tie neighbor to neighbor, where spectators will never think to look. The arch stands with its wooden cradle still in place, a newborn that has not yet been asked to walk. Below, the lead pigs arrive in a handcart, dull gray and heavy, catching a late beam of sun like secret water. Tomorrow, the joints will learn to keep their promises in iron and lead. Morning drifts in a fine ash from the lime kilns, and yesterday's timber ribs wear it like a pale veil. Calm begins with heat. Along the scaffold, braziers glow, their coals trained to hold a steady red, while pigs of lead soften in a shallow pan, each stamped with a smelter's mark. A smith's apprentice works the bellows. A bucket waits to hiss when tongs meet water. A pot of oil warms for hinges that would rather not complain. Vinegar dampens dust on swept planks. The air holds a mixture of tar from guide ropes, resin from fresh wedges, and the mineral breath of travertine. Before any pour, hands rehearse the hidden anatomy. Masons kneel along the ring joints and brush out the mortises cut yesterday. Shallow beds near the arch's extrados, where clamps will lie like little bridges sunk out of sight. The clamps themselves, iron bars with ends turned down, a P-shaped form many crews favor, have been sized for these pockets. Where design asks it, short dowels, iron pins, marry superposed blocks through round sockets drilled true. Romans did not invent these customs. Greek walls learned to hold hands with iron and lead centuries earlier. But here the practice is systematic, almost bureaucratic. Each bay lists its pockets in a scribe's neat wax. Each clamp is tallied as seriously as bread. Not every joint receives iron. Not every bay keeps the same rhythm of clamp and dowel. Facework in travertine takes it clean. Inner rings, where brick and concrete will share the burden, ask for fewer metal vows. The rule is simple because it must be obeyed by tired men. Where thrusts want to walk, give them company. Tension rises with the first melt. Lead is patient to liquefy and quick to punish fingers. The scythe skims dross from the pan with an iron spoon that looks stolen from a giant, judging heat by how the metal sheets from the lip and by the note it makes against a damp tile. A boy brings a clay ladle, new, warmed, not shocked by sudden fire, and stands between curiosity and caution. The foreman checks the wedges beneath the centering posts, making sure the arch remains a guest of wood a little longer. No one rushes lead. It remembers every insult. Centerpiece then, filling the hidden joints. Two men press a wooden mask tight over the mortise mouth, a little form to keep the pour honest. The ladle tilts. The first bright thread of lead finds the trench and runs, quick and silvery, already dulling as it decides to become solid. It puddles around the iron, seeping beneath the turned ends, licking at tooth chisel marks that give it purchase. A wisp of smoke folds into the morning. A second ladle follows, then a third. A hammer taps the form so bubbles climb and break. The lead will do 3 quiet jobs at once: protect the iron from wet anger in the stone, widen grip where surfaces are uneven, and cushion against the small, hungry movements that seasons teach. Elsewhere, a dowel takes its vow. A round socket aligns with its mate above. The pin lowers with a sound like a nail deciding to become a thought. A funnel cut from an amphora shard feeds a skim of lead into the annulus. The mason wipes the excess with a twist of cloth that will never be clean again, and does it without rhetoric. Joints cannot be persuaded by adjectives. When the surface cools to a gray skin, he scores it lightly, a sign for himself and no one else. Wheel crews and crane captain become accomplices to the arch's patience. While the metal cools, the next course rises and comes to rest by the same quiet negotiations as yesterday. Plumb against chalk, mallet against pride. Iron dogs bite across joints where the curve insists. Their tails bend to sink in lead that will later be hammered flush and invisible. A scribe notes which lengths were used, a courtesy to the future that few yards bother to keep, but valued when repairs come asking for memory. Talk wanders as hands repeat. Someone says, lead makes men sick if they breathe its temper too long. Someone else shrugs and points out that everything here does, given time. A boy tries to guess the weight of a coil of hemp by squinting. He fails and learns something honest about fibers. A carpenter smells the pitch in a boom and decides to add a lashing before noon wind remembers its habits. Above, the sun walks from rib to rib and proves timber can look noble when it agrees to be humble. With clamps set, a ritual of courage begins, easing the centering, not removal. Lime mortar likes long conversations, but enough to ask whether the arch believes its own story. Wedges at the posts answer to a mallet, 1 tap, then 2. The wooden ribs sink a finger's width. All eyes lift. The arch does not sigh or shift. It goes on pretending it has always been sky. Another tap here, a restraint there. The foreman lays his cheek to the intrados as if listening for lies. The silence that follows has weight. On the outer face, the ashlar shows small recesses cut at regular intervals. Between bays, travertine pilasters wait for the engaged columns that will argue order to citizens' eyes. Tuscan strength at the base, Ionyx polite curls above, Corinthian acanthus crowning the third tier. In the carving yard, an engraver scratches faint guides on a capital blank, teaching leaves to sprout from stone with a knife's grammar. Not every spectator will notice. Every craftsperson will. Inside the shell, carpenters measure spans for the barrel vaults that will run back from the arcade to the radial walls. Here, concrete will learn to fly. Planks are bent and nailed into centering for those vaults, ribs picked out like the skeleton of a fish. The pozzolanic mix, lime, volcanic ash, water, coarse aggregate, will be laid in lifts, each tamped until it consents to be monolithic. Brick courses, bipedal set as permanent centering and finish, will face the vaults, their stamps fixing today's kilns and tomorrow's archaeology. You can hear decisions in the rhythm of trowels, wetter for speed, stiffer for edges, a handful of crushed potsherd where someone swears it toughens the skin. A runner arrives dusty from the kiln yard. Today's ash is darker, blown in by gusts off the Alban hills. The lime men want to alter ratios, less paste for the same slump. The foreman nods. By evening, your trowel can taste the difference. A creamier spread, a slower set. Science here is a habit disguised as gossip. By late light, the lead has closed its eyes. The clamps lie under neat mortar plugs. The dowel mouths have vanished as if stone had grown tendons. The centering stays, prudent and patient. But the wedges hold a new story. The curve speaks more in stone's voice and less in wood's. Men stretch their backs and eat standing, suddenly aware of stiffness, the work kept busy all day. Somewhere a water seller rattles his tin cups. Somewhere a mule argues with a cart in sentences everyone understands. Along the arcade line, a single bay is chosen for a bolder test. Wedges withdraw another thumb's width. The timber ribs breathe out. Nothing changes that sight can prosecute. A coin stood on edge on the impost does not quiver. A mason smiles without showing teeth. They nail the wedges again. Enough. Tomorrow, with dawn's cool logic, they will ease two more, and then one bay's centering will come down entirely, slow as a season, while everyone pretends not to pray. Beyond the arch line, carpenters chalk the first curves of the return vaults, concrete ribs that will teach shade to gather, and crowds to flow like water through stone. The braziers wink out, the last ladle crusts, and the sight settles into a patient hum. At first light, wood will begin to surrender the air to concrete. Before the heat finds the scaffold, the sight sounds different, hollow, expectant, the particular quiet of woodwork, waiting for something heavier to confess itself. Calm begins with curvature. Carpenters climb the inner scaffold and lay out the centering for the return vaults that will run from the arcade back to the radial walls, ribs that turn daylight into measured shade. They call the curved frame centine, paired ribs cut to the same radius, stitched with laths, knee brace to keep a twitch from becoming a lesson. A chalked arc on a straight plank becomes a family of arcs in air, their undersides rubbed smooth so fresh mortar does not snag. Timber teaches concrete to behave. On ledges cut into the travertine piers, little shoulders you would miss unless you knew where to look, carpenters set bedding strips to receive the first laths. Wedges tune the crown by finger widths. A long spirit level, Libra, with its water eye, decides what even means when weight wants to disagree. Farther inboard, other gangs raise analogous ribs for the annular corridors, so that the stadium to be begins to fill with parallel tunnels of promise, each pointed inward toward the arena like spokes inside a wheel. The materials arrive like a recipe recited in a kitchen that knows who will eat. Lime, slaked yesterday in pits until it sighed itself into paste. Pozzolanic ash, some batches from the Campanian fields around Puteoli, a dark gray that smells faintly of the sea. Other batches lighter, local, acceptable but not quite the same magic. Coarse aggregate, fist-sized tough and broken brick. Finer sand, carried in baskets that leave a braided kiss of dust on a man's hip. Water in buckets and skins, rationed by foremen who have learned what too wet costs 3 days later. Tension rises with the first lift of a wheelbarrow into air. A crane doesn't lift concrete, men do, up ladders, along planks, to the waiting centering. A mason tests the day's mix with a trowel twist. Does it stand in a soft peak? Does it spread when persuaded? Does it greet the lath with courtesy rather than splash? Ratios are habit and feel. Someone mutters 3 sand to 1 lime, ash by the handfuls, and someone else answers with a palm tilted for a little less, friend. See the shine? On sites like this, science and superstition are cousins who borrow each other's clothes. Centerpiece, a barrel vault taking its first breath. The brick-facing crew go first, laying bipedales, broad tiles roughly 2 Roman feet across, in a shallow arc across the centering ribs. Each plate sits in a smear of paste and meets its neighbor with joints that are more intention than ornament. The stamps on the bricks, marks of brickyards out by the Tibur, print today's date in the building's bloodstream. Behind the brick skin, the concrete begins its slow migration from bucket to eternity. Masons lay the mix in lifts a hand thick, tamping with wooden rammers until the surface darkens and the sound changes from scratch to thud. You hear the vault becoming continuous, a skin learning it has no seams. At the haunches, the lower flanks, where thrust will someday travel like a rumor, the crew forks in coarser aggregate, letting the bigger tough chunks lock like knuckles. Along the crown, where weight is honest and wants less company, the mix runs finer. A carpenter leans down from the scaffold to feel the centerings hum through his wrist. With each ram he reads the timber's reply the way a midwife reads breath. When the lift reaches the springing line, the foreman nods to add a thin sacrificial layer of small fragments and paste. Later, when the vault is set, this will be roughened for plaster without wounding the structure that holds it. Shade begins as geometry and arrives as relief. Stand under the new skin, still propped on its wooden cradle, and the sun breaks into slices between bays. The air cools by a degree that tired men can quantify better than any water clock. You can imagine crowds moving through these corridors, a current that never stalls because the plan refused to let it. Radial walls stand like disciplined trees, their own little barrel vaults budding inward to the arena's edge, where dark passage will one day meet bright sand. Honest cautions walk with the crew. The debate about mixes never ends. Some swear Campanian ash makes a vault that sets faster and shrugs off centuries of weather. Others lift a handful of local product and say, if the tamp is true, the sky won't know. A runner arrives with news. 1 pit yielded lime that set too hot. Beware steaming beds. The foreman adjusts. Thinner lifts, more patience, less water. No one resents the delay. Resentment wastes more time than carefulness ever could. Edges matter most where eyes will travel. At the mouth of each bay, travertine archivolts will later wrap the vault's end with a bright bone. But for now, a brick arras defines the line. Masons snap a taut cord stained with lamp black, linee nigri, to give the plasterers a future truth to aim at. On the intraros, they score shallow keys, scratches made by a toothed float, so the finishing coat will grip. Someone mutters about pigments and lime washes to come, about a light that will make even cheap plaster look like thoughtfulness. In the annular corridor behind the first ring, a second team demonstrates a trick the site will use again and again: permanent centering. They lay a lattice of brick courses as a lost framework, thin ribs that stay inside the concrete forever, lending shape while the paste discovers itself. It buys speed where timber is scarce and frees carpenters for more demanding bays. Not every vault warrants the expense. Where crowds will see and touch, wood gives the finer curve. Where only wind and maintenance crews will pass, brick and concrete whisper to one another without witnesses. A small scare at noon earns its own proverb. A ladle of mix drops where the lath had not been wedged tight. The spill bulges the cloth that kept drips off the arcade face below. A carpenter swears softly and slaps in an extra cleat. A mason wipes the bulge and grins at the new rule: no crown without checking the belly. Later men will repeat it as if it were always obvious. By mid-afternoon, 3 bays of the lower corridor wear their wet armor. The centering remains, of course. Lime and ash demand time. But wedges at the posts are eased a finger's worth. The vaulter's version of letting a child stand while your hands hover an inch from their ribs. The vault does not sag or whisper complaint. It simply accepts that wood will not love it forever. The change is too small for spectators, large enough for men who sleep better for having heard it. Beyond the shade, sunlight explodes on the sand where the arena floor will be. Not a floor at all yet, but a packed earth oval above a forest of future rooms. A surveyor's string sketches where trapdoors and lifts may someday pierce the surface. Ideas spoken at Domitian's dinners more than Vespasian's plans, but already imagined in the way engineers stare at distance. Toward evening, the corridor cools and accrues smells it will know for centuries. Mortar's mineral breath, wet rope, sweat dried in linen, the faint sweetness of pitch. A water seller steps to the rope and rattles his cups. A boy steals a glance up the curve and sees a piece of sky shaped by law. In the carving yard, a capital leaf opens under a chisel. In the kiln yard, stamps dry for tomorrow's bricks. In the vault you stand beneath, yesterday's decisions pretend to have existed forever. The centering will come out when the moon has turned its face a few times. Before that, stairs must find their treads, and corridors must learn to pour people like water through stone. Morning slips along the half-made corridors like a thin stream testing banks, and the sight answers with measured channels. Calm begins with the map in 3 dimensions. Stairs and passages pinned to the oval the way veins learn a body. Surveyors reappear with cords and tablets. Carpenters chalk new rectangles on cured vaults. Masons line out landings with a care that feels more like tailoring than building. The amphitheatre's genius is not height or bulk alone. It is movement diagrammed into stone so precisely that a crowd can behave without thinking. You run a palm along a barrel vault's cooling flank and imagine footsteps, the way a miller imagines flour before it leaves the grain. Radial walls, those disciplined trees set earlier, now sprout treads. The Romans do not love fancy stair geometry. They love stairs that work. Straight flights climb between landings in rhythm with breath and gossip. Where the curve insists, dogleg turns reset the climb without confusing the feet. Riser to tread keeps to a module the guilds carry in their bones. About a palm and 2 fingers up, 3 palms forward, enough to teach legs respect, not rebellion. The treads themselves will be stone where feet are many, brick where load is kinder, wood only where tomorrow won't mind replacing today. A mason dumps a basket of broken tuff and brick into the stair core, then tamps a pour of lime ash concrete that sets like a decision. On the outer skin, neat brick faces receive the heiress of each tread, their stamps already storing names no spectator will ever read. At the nosings, those front lips that take the city's weight, travertine slips into place, honed to a skin that will polish under sandals until it begins to shine. You run a thumb along a fresh nose and feel the satisfaction of a line that invites the foot rather than trips it. Between staircases, corridors gather themselves into the system later ages will nickname vomitoria, not for anything a stomach does, but for how crowds pour in and out as if a building could breathe people. The plan is a ring within rings, the outer ambulatory beneath the arcades, a middle ring binding the radial walls, an inner ring near the podium that will kiss the arena's edge. Each ring receives light from the bays between piers, cool vertical slices, and from slits yet to be opened higher up. Where a passage meets a stair, thresholds step down a finger width so puddles don't travel and dust pauses to remember it is dust. Tension rises with the fit-out, the moment when lines on wax become wood and iron that ask to be touched. Carpenters set posts for railings along the stairwells, driving oak tenons into rebates left yesterday in vault springings. Wedges scolding wobble into virtue. Bronze clamps arrive from a smith near the forum boarium, their mouths ready to bite rail to post, so badly placed elbows will meet metal, not air. A boy carries a bundle of iron cramps like a bunch of black flowers. A foreman counts them with a look that suggests he has seen fingers lost where counting was lazy. At thresholds, the masons lay little thresholds of travertine, each with a rebated lip to discourage skids, each with a shallow channel to host the iron of a future gate. For there will be gates, grills of wood or metal that manage excitement into order. The amphitheater promises access to many, but never all at once. The same city that laughs at senators behind closed shutters will learn to respect a porter with a key and a schedule. Centerpiece, 1 stair tower, from ground to the first manianum, the lowest tier of seating, brought from line to life so cleanly you can walk it without looking at your feet. The first flight rises between radial walls, freshly plastered with a rough coat, the grain of the trowel leaving keys for the finer skin to come. Landings open to the outer ambulatory through arches that frame the city like a slow procession. Slit of sky, slice of roof, a lemon tree on a balcony 2 streets off. At the elbow of the dogleg, an inspection niche holds a lamp ledge and a small shelf for a bucket. Maintenance is a religion here, and its gods are oil and water. Men test the grade with a carpenter's level, a little trough of water that makes eye contact with a scratch on wood, and with the more important instrument, the ankle. The foreman walks the flight twice, counting under his breath, not for piety, but to hear whether his body agrees with numbers. The stair turns, climbs, turns again, and finds the vomitorium's mouth, a broad arched opening that will later carry a painted numeral big enough to read while laughing. Today, a chalk mark and a wax tablet know it as 6 sims. The opening leans ever so slightly outward at the jambs, battering they call it, so the mass above teaches the threshold to be brave rather than brittle. Along the outer ambulatory, the brick vaults now bear small clay pipes, tubi fictiles, sleeked into the concrete shoulder where corridor meets wall, a simple way to pour off the small condensations and wind-brought rains that long corridors collect. Drainage is not glamorous. It is how buildings remain villages instead of ruins. At the inner ring, tiny channels cut into the paving will one day carry the wash of spilled wine and water away from the podium before it becomes a smell the city will not forgive. Talk turns to crowd arithmetic. A veteran exactus, experienced in war and crowds, has been seconded to the works to advise on flow. He walks the rings with a rope of knotted fibers, 1 knot per 10 heartbeats, and times the distance between gates. His conclusions become scratches on a wax tablet that become instructions. Benches to be set in runs of a certain length, steps between them sized so knees and shins make peace, aisles given just enough width to admit 2 Romans passing with dignity, if not enthusiasm. He mutters to the architect about keeping the seating nearest vomitoria reserved for the slow or the important, knowing the overlap is considerable. Overhead, bays in the second tier begin to frame new views, and with them the hint of class made visible. The lowest seats, ima cavea, for those with names and histories. The middle, media cavea, for merchants who loan their neighbors money and patience. The upper, summa cavea, for the many who will teach the building its truest sound. Behind all, in corridors with their own gates and stairs, soldiers will take their stations on opening days like punctuation ready to settle an argument. You can already sense how a rumor will run around these rings faster than a man can, and how an order will run faster yet when brass and leather insist. Small accidents write small wisdom. A porter bruises his thigh on a tread where the nosing stood proud. The mason shaves the lip with 3 neat strokes and mutters a rule that will be remembered as if an elder had said it. Pride on a stair is a lawsuit. A summer gust persuades dust into a whirl along the outer ambulatory. Carpenters answer with a windbreak of woven hurdles that will later become a template for permanent screens. A boy counts the steps and forgets his number at 40. A mason tells him to count landings, not treads, and the boy pretends to have known that all along. Late light paints the corridors the color of warm bread. You stop on a landing and look through 2 lines at once. The near arch of the vomitorium, and beyond it, the nearer curve of the arena's retaining wall, rising course by course. Between them, space composes a promise, a way for thousands to arrive not as a flood that drowns sense, but as a tide that knows its shoals. Somewhere outside, in markets that will serve these crowds, a butcher sharpens a cleaver, a baker checks his oven, a woman folds a linen that will be a cushion and calls it a luxury. On the night air, a rumor arrives. The marble for the podium seats, those closest to the sand, has begun to leave Luna's quarries at Carrara. Blocks white as cloud, dense as silence, are being measured against wagons and patience. The amphitheatre's corridors pause as if to listen. Tomorrow, stone that receives men will meet stone that receives status. Dawn licks the arena wall and finds carpenters already measuring comfort into stone. Calm begins with edges. Along the podium, the retaining ring that holds the sand apart from the first ranks of humanity. Masons dry-fit marble blocks, white as condensed cloud. This is Luna's gift, Carrara's labor, sailed and hauled and cursed across miles, so that Rome's skin can be cool even when Rome burns with appetite. Travertine is bone, concrete is muscle, marble is the public face that remembers names. Templates arrive from the carver's yard, radiused gauges that teach curves to repeat, wooden dummies of seat noses shaped to keep a thigh honest and a hem unfrayed. The podium's first course steps back in a precise rebate, so marble revetment can nest like a fingernail on a bed it trusts. On benches that will cradle the highest orders, bronze cramps and iron dogs wait to be swallowed by lead. Old partners performing a ceremony, no crowd will witness. Where the joint is wide, a thin shim of slate makes the conversation civilized. A mason runs his palm along an arris and frowns until the line consents to behave. Class becomes architecture. The ema cavea, closest to the sand, receives senators. Their approach through dedicated passageways, their seats numbered and, in time, inscribed. Scholars argue how much of this naming was said at opening and how much came with use. What you see today is the intention, painted numerals beneath the bench front, neat tituli panels smoothed for letters that a careful hand will cut when lists arrive from offices where ink dries slowly. The equestrian order will sit behind the senators. Tradition says 14 ranks marked out for them, since Roscius's law learned to love theaters. Here, the practice is adapted for games that smell of dust and iron. Above them, the media cavier takes citizens neither poor nor powerful, the weight of Rome's middle carried on stone. Farther up, the summa cavea receives the many on wooden benches that will need replacing when weather and sweat do their old arithmetic. Women will be seated high by old practice hardened under Augustus. Exceptions breed whispers more than reforms. Tension rises with a delivery that belongs in a temple. The first carved bench for the podium, a single slab with an undercut nose and a gently hollowed pan, its underside chased with sockets for clamps that will be a secret handshake between stones. 4 men and a wheel handle the slab. 2 more handle prayer, though they would never say that aloud. The tread wheel's barrel hymn resumes. The sling rises. Leather pads kiss corners. The boom breathes. When the slab hangs over its bed, the foreman's plumb line settles like a verdict. Down and slower, and now, the arras meets its neighbor with a seam so thin that mortar seems a rumor. Lid work returns like a basso continuo beneath marble's soprano. In the cramp's pockets, the bright pour runs and dulls, wrapping metal in a soft metal that defeats water and the tiny treacheries of motion. A boy watches the color change and learns a law he will never write down. Sound tells truth before shine does. On the visible face, a thin grout is buttered into hairlines with a bone spatula. The surface becomes singular, a continuity that invites a senator's robe to slide without learning a catch. Centerpiece. A craftsman kneels to the first name that will live in stone, not yet cut, only painted as a promise so placement can be checked before hammer and chisel risk permanence. The letterer, steady wrist, short temper for nonsense, lays out a senator's nomen and cognomen with a brush, charcoal suspended in size. No invented patron here, no flattery by guess. The names will come from lists that remember rank and debt and favor. Today it is trial ink, aligning script with knee room, testing whether the arm of a neighbor will find its certainty without stealing an inch. The brush floats a capital's geometry, a measured serif, a spine that doesn't apologize. Later, the carver will incise with a flat chisel that bites clean V-grooves, shadows that persist when the sun forgets to. Around the ring, the seating grammar repeats and varies. Stair aisles, scalaria, divide the cavea into slices, cunei, each cuneus finding its own rhythm of benches and rises. Risers climb a palm and 2 fingers. Bench depths follow the measure of a Roman thigh, seasoned by centuries of dinners and councils. In the middle tiers, brick substructures support stone treads that will take sandals and naked feet and, on bad days, blood. Up high, well-seasoned pine and fir become benching fastened to walls, with simple iron straps. Cheap to replace, quick to remove when repair teaches humility. Railings bite into sockets along the fronts so that a stumble becomes a bruise, not a fall. At the ends of rows, small lips, plutei, tighten gaps where the city might otherwise flow too eagerly. Sound tests begin before musicians arrive. A foreman stands on a landing and speaks at a man 3 bays away. His words bend along the bowl and return intelligible, the vowels riding the vaults as if trained. Someone claps. The echo counts off brick, then concrete, then air. The amphitheatre is not a theater. It does not court every whisper, but it will carry a roar the way the Tibur carries spring. To help it, the masons line certain backs with a denser coat of plaster, a lime-marble mix rubbed to hardness that scatters sound less and reflects more. A rumor flits that polished bronze shields set behind statues can sharpen echoes. Whether that story belongs to theaters or imagination, men turn their heads and picture glitter they may never see. Honest cautions walk the tiers. Marble is forgiving under a robe, less so under panic. Smoothness must stop short of treachery. Masons brush the noses with a light grit before the final wash, so sandals reform the stone, instead of the other way around. Drainage channels are chased beneath bench fronts to catch spilled wine and storm lash, their mouths hidden in shadow joints, so dignity and cleanliness become allies. At the stair margins, travertine thresholds receive shallow ribbing, a conversation between foot and stone that will continue for lifetimes. Work pauses when a runner arrives from the Luna yards, with newsmen pretend not to need. A small slide near the quarry mouth slowed the cutting. Barges will make up the time if wind remembers fairness. A scribe adjusts deliveries in his tablet, sliding crews along the ring like tokens in a game played for keeps. The carvers do not complain. They have capitals to finish, consoles to chase, little lion heads to coax from blocks that will pour rain into chains instead of across patrons' shoulders. In the arena, the retaining wall rises another course, its inner face rubbed smooth where beasts and men will brush it. A low parapet along the podium front earns its own fittings, sockets for barriers, holes for the stout posts that will carry a taut net. Better argument than courage when a cat forgets its contract. Then, ironwork bears a smith's private embellishments that no one will credit him for. A small leaf filed into a strap, a crosshatch that catches the light for a blink, and then stops showing off. As evening thins the heat, a small delegation from the curule chairs walks the ring. Stewards, notables, a man whose pen can make money remember a path. They count steps with eyes, not feet. They touch the marble and do not say good. They ask where shade will fall at the hour games begin. And someone points up to empty air and says, "The sail will teach the sun manners." There is a way that officials nod when a plan answers a question they have not yet been asked. You see it, and the day grows an inch taller. Outside the walls, neighborhoods study the new order of entrances painted on boards, numbers and arrows, a discipline that will in time live in the city's tongue. Bakers change their proofing to reach mouths before trumpets. Water sellers oil their hinges. Mothers test cushions, deciding which linen will become public. Men who never expect to sit in marble watch the white benches the way sailors watch weather, with respect, without envy that corrodes use. The last task is quiet, washing the day from the stone. Sponges and buckets, a thin rain coaxed across benches that tonight will remember only hands and water and a little moon. From the upper walk, the city looks closer, the forum's edges softened, the Palatine a stack of shadows. A messenger, dusty from the yard near the Colossus, brings word that the second tier's engaged columns are ready to stand, with their capitals' leaves arguing about light. Morning climbs the upper tiers and finds carpenters and riggers where only swallows flew last week. Calm begins with brackets. Along the attic, the fourth level that crowns the orders, stone corbels jut like clenched knuckles, evenly spaced, each cut with a socket and a shallow channel that remembers rain. Into these mouths, crews set stout mast shoes, oak blocks bound with bronze, and test them with the hammer's flat persuasion. The air up here tastes different. Tar, hemp, hot lime ghosted upward from the vaults below, and the clean, briny sting that sailors bring on their clothes even in a city that pretends to be land. Masts arrive on shoulder and wheel, tapered spars taller than townhouses, their heels shod in iron, their heads pierced for sheaves. A foreman runs a palm along one to feel raised grain where weather tried a lesson. He points, and a boy brings fish glue and linen to dress it before the rope can make a home in the wound. The sockets accept the mast heels with a mutter of wood on stone. Guy lines, hemp, tarred, hand-laid, run aft in a beam to iron rings set back along the attic walk. Tautened, the rig begins to look like an orchard taught to stand in a storm. It is not a ship, but it asks men who know ships. A detachment from the classis, sailors of the fleet, many say from Misenum, file onto the attic with the quiet competence of men who count gusts instead of syllables. They tie knots with hands that don't need to look. They test blocks that must greet a load with silky impartiality. An overseer from the aedile's office watches them like a man who understands that shade can be politics. Senators ask for comfort, citizens make shade an expectation, emperors make it a promise. Tension rises with a coil of canvas unrolled across the upper walk. The cloth is thick, loosely woven, heavy enough to quiet argument by draping it. Some say the Romans called it vela. The set that will crown this bowl is the velarium, the big public sail. Scholars will argue for centuries about its reach, whether it covered the whole arena or only the seating rings, how deep it pushed toward the center, how it learned to behave in gusts and in heat. But today, up here, the language is practical. Triangles and trapezoids cut to radiate between masts, edges stiffened with bolt rope, bronze rings sewn into corners with waxed twine. A sailmaker kneels and pushes a palmful of all holes through a double hem, the wax squeaking a little like a mouse. Centerpiece, the first rehearsal of shade. Lines run. From each masthead, halyards dive to blocks and then to capstans, where crews of 4 take the bars and lean. From the cornice, stay ropes run inward to a great ring of cordage. Think of a spider's web whose center is missing, anchored to the tops of short, stout struts set along the arena's inner edge. Between these outer masts and inner posts, the panels will stretch, part catenary, part discipline. Far below, the seating gleams, polite, expectant, white stone that will glare by noon if men fail here. Hands to halyards. The captain's voice is low and salt-seasoned. Sailors settle their feet along the parapet and on the narrow walk behind the corbels. Walk her up. The first panel goes aloft, heavy, until wind remembers its manners. The ropes creak, the sound of plant fiber asking for patience. The canvas lifts, catches, and for a breath tries to teach the amphitheatre to heel like a ship. Guy lines answer. The mast's head stays honest. At 3 bays out, the panel's leech finds its neighbor's grommets, and the edge is seized with a speed that makes sewing look like combat. A boy runs along the parapet, feeding lashings through bronze eyes set in the cornice so the wind's first flirtation will not become a romance. Shade arrives not as night, but as courtesy. A coolness passes across the Imei Cavia, like a hand laid on a fevered brow. Down in the corridors, men look up because light has abruptly learned to think. A senator's steward, walking the podium to measure distances for cushions, stops and smiles without showing teeth. Above, the panel bows in the small wind like a compliant animal. Even skeptics admit the air feels different. Not every moment is cooperative. A gust shoulders in from the west and tests the new geometry. The canvas hums a low note, then a higher one. The leeches flutter. The bolt rope talks through the rings like a harpsichord built from bronze. The captain's hand says hold. The capstan crews brace. The men on tail ropes give a breath and take half back. Tar darkens a line under load. A block complains too fast and is silenced with tallow. One mast leans an inch more than polite. An extra guy bites into a ring and turns the lean into a lesson. In the north, a weak stitch parts with a sigh. A sailmaker is already there with a palm and needle the size of a child's forearm. The panel learns its new seam before the gust remembers to be bored. Practicalities pile up like coins. Canvas sweats pitch and die in heat. A washer's team will be needed after games to scrub and dry panels in the Campus Martius. The masts want periodic inspection. Iron shoes rust, wood checks, rope stales. Sailors expect pay. Shade is not charity when it takes 4 dozen men to rehearse and 100 to set and tend. So, the aediles and architects swap tablets and set numbers to bodies. How many lines per mast? How many sailors per line? How many panels per bay to keep sun from finding a cruel angle at mid-afternoon? A clerk notes that shade is not uniform. Edges leak light. Corners collect heat. A compromise is drawn. Deeper panels toward the west for afternoons, lighter toward the east, the whole rig trimmable like a ship, so that wind and sun's malice are made to argue with each other rather than with people. A boy asks the captain whether the whole arena can be covered. The man squints toward the oval's bright heart and says, not unkindly, "You don't cover the sky, you teach it manners." The honest uncertainty walks the parapet with him. Some days the wind will bully, some days the sun will win. On days of calm, the velarium will make a tent that feels like mercy. Later antiquaries will write of awnings thick as sails. Others will suspect lighter linens. You, here, feel weight in the palms and call it truth. Along the attic's back walk, amphorae of water stand at intervals, not for men, but for hemp. A rigger dips a rag and runs it along a halyard. The line drinks and stops squealing through the block. Another rubs beeswax into a whipping he made yesterday. The strands stop fraying like a person after a bath. A carpenter knocks a small rebate into a corbel where a ring wanted to chafe. He paints the stone with a slurry of lime and oil so grit will not become a slow saw. By late light, 2 wedges of sail stand proud, one at the south, one at the west, and the amphitheatre wears a tricorn of shade. On the sand, the outline is not an oculus, but 3 soft triangles that meet like old friends trying not to step on each other's stories. In the seats, shadows cut benches into alternating cool and warm, a geometry the city will learn as a clock. The breeze toys with the hem and is scolded by a sheet line. Down below, in the offices where money worries about itself, A scribe closes a tablet about rations. Sailors eat like men who lift the wind. The steward looks up at the sail, and then down at grain ledgers and salted fish accounts, and wonders how shade will taste when he has to pay for it in barrels and bread. Tomorrow, the city will learn the cost of comfort, pay, rations, and time borrowed from other appetites. Morning accounts before morning work. Calm begins with a stylus. In a low room off the outer ambulatory, the steward's table smells of wax, oil, and the hard leather of well-traveled satchels. Clay bullets sit in a shallow tray like dull fruit, each stamped with yesterday's deliveries. Lime, ash, rope, pigs of lead, bundles of sawed lath, coils of hemp, sacks of nails. A water clock gurgles. A buoy marks its drips with a notch, so arguments about hours can be settled with something wetter than memory. Men in dusty tunics wait, palms rough, eyes doing the math of food while their mouths stay civil. Pay here is not a single river. It is a delta with many mouths. Guildmasters contract by the bay or by the 100 stones. Wheel crews by the day. Sailors by the set, with extra if the wind taught rough manners. Carters by the trip and the axle. Brickmakers per 1,000 stamped plates. Lime burners by the kiln charge. Ash carriers by the basket. The steward speaks the language of all these coins and all these hungers. He calls names from a wooden tablet and lays out small piles. Bronze asses, a few silver denarii where skill has learned to demand respect. Into each pile he drops tokens for rations, discs of baked clay impressed with marks, to be redeemed at sheds the site calls kitchens, but that feel more like logistics wrapped in steam. Rations are the other payroll, the one that moves through the belly. In the shade of a long shed, women and boys ladle out the day's measures. Wheat and barley in proportions that begun as favors and hardened into habit. Lentils and beans that smell honest when boiled, brined olives, a garlic head, a wedge of sheep's cheese whose rind carries a map of yesterday's sun. For some crews there is salted fish from the bay, sardais that travel better than gossip, washed of its brine in running water, and grilled on iron bars until the fat wakes. A jar of cheap wine stands where men can water it without shame. On cooler days, a pot turns meat into a democracy of stew. Goat if the steward won an argument, pork if Rome remembered to be generous, bones always. A man who works a wheel eats more. A man who counts eats less and pretends not to notice. Not everyone lines up the same way. The wheel crew collect first, by right and by necessity. Hunger and height make poor friends. Stonecutters from Tibur get a little extra oil, written into the contract by a master whose thumbprint on a bulla stands for 3 decades of reputation. Sailors present a tally stick stamped yesterday at the attic and receive dried figs and hard biscuit in addition to their share. A rope learns to behave when its keeper does not faint. Carters and their oxen drink where a trough remembers rain. The steward keeps a separate tablet for animals because oxen are wages too, and Rome has learned to count them carefully. Tension rises where money and time meet pride. A brickman argues that a load was undercounted. The steward taps a stamp with his stylus and points at the kiln's mark, as if pointing at law. A younger mason claims 2 denarii for a keystone set in a wind that should have earned hazard. The foreman lifts his shoulders, the sign that says, "We all walked in that wind, friend," and slides him a token for oil instead, a compromise that tells the body it matters even when ledgers pretend to be blind. Near the door, a carter stands quiet while the clerk checks his tally against milestones. He is paid for distance as much as weight, and the road keeps its own books in ruts and stones. He leaves richer than he expected and poorer than he deserves, the ordinary arithmetic of cities. Centerpiece, the noon ration becoming a breathing room for all the bargains that keep a building from unlearning itself. In the shade under the first tier, men sit with their backs to travertine that has held the mornings cool. Bowls of grain porridge come first, poles with a trickle of oil, the spoon cutting it into squares that refuse to be squares. Bread travels in cloth, torn with fingers, traded for olives, baptized in wine like a little sacrament no priest would recognize. A boy salts the fish with a pinch practiced in his wrist. The grill pops and spits. Someone laughs when a drop finds his skin. Overhead, the velarium's hem draws a dark line across the white benches, and the air below it feels like a decision. Talk eats too. Men count days since the last full pay, days until a wife's due date, days since a lime kiln exploded a lid and taught everyone why time is measured in faces as much as in drips. Rumors chase one another in circles, a shipment of Luna marble delayed by a bad wind. a magistrate's nephew taking a tour and pretending not to measure with his eyes, a promise that the first ring of arcades will open for inspection next month. A sailor tells a story about Misenum's harbor that only half the listeners believe and all enjoy. A foreman mentions that yesterday the governor's clerk asked how many men could be spared for repairs at the aqueduct if a storm takes a bite. The table goes quiet for a breath, the way tables go when loyalty is invited to divide itself. Honest accounts include debts you cannot write down. Many hands on this site are free, contracted, gilded, proud. Some are freedmen working to pay for the years a patron bought back from fate. Some are convicts, assigned to heavy carts and quarry spoil under guard. Rome believes labor can polish a crime, and also enjoys cheap work. Some are captives from wars whose names taste like a distant city's smoke. Judea is the word most mouths use this year, when they mean both money and sorrow. Whether their hands cut these stones or only carried them, the empire's reach sits in the ledger as surely as lime and ash. The steward's stylus never writes those categories, but eyes in the queue can, and sometimes do. The practical politics of the site show in small mercies and their price. A jar of vinegar sits where anyone can reach. A sponge dipped in it makes heat clearer and keeps thirst honest. A bucket of water waits to quench a burn, and a set of herbs in a pot at the shed door stands for a woman whose grandmother knew which leaves talk to wounds. Plantain for the scrape, yarrow for the bleeding, honey for the cut that wants to go bad. A boy who dipped his hand too near yesterday's lead holds up his palm and receives counsel that is partly medicine and partly shame, tailored to keep memory sharp. Afternoon brings the other tax, fatigue. The steward knows that work done after the sun drags its heel costs more in repairs than it pays in pride. So, he calculates borrowed time. When a wheel crew is light of breath, he slides a token to a spare pair of legs. Extra pay for a half shift that will be remembered when someone else gasps tomorrow. When a mason's hands begin to lie, the foreman assigns him to brush joints and clean tools. Tasks that tell dignity, it may keep its name while its wrists remain. If the wind freshens dangerously, the steward buys caution with cheese and calls it a reward, and a crane rests without anyone admitting fear. Outside the shed, small economies braid into a market. A woman sells cushions sewn from old tunics and stuffed with chaff. She has learned the exact price at which a back will stop pretending stone is a friend. A boy hawks cheap cups rubbed with oil so wine will forget its roughness. He buys his stock from a potter whose stamp you have seen drying behind the kiln yard. An old soldier offers dice that roll like chances and knives that roll like certainty. Nobody buys the knives, which is not the same as nobody wanting them. As the sun throws long glances through the arcades, the steward tallies again. He counts what is left of grain, fish, oil, wine. He counts men who sign for the afternoon shift. He counts the jars set aside for sailors who will sleep on site tonight to tend the velarium if wind grows troublesome. He scratches a note to the 8 Isles about the rising cost of ash, harder to bring up river when barges prefer oil and grain, and suggests a bonus for the carriers before they suggest it with their feet. A messenger arrives from the contractor's office near the Velia. New terms, new hands, new expectations. The tablet smells of fresh wax and politics. The steward reads, frowns, and closes the lid like a door. Tomorrow, the shed line will be longer and truer names for labor will ask to be spoken aloud. Morning begins with 2 lines that never quite meet. Calm begins with paperwork. In the contractor's yard just off the Via Sacra, tablets lie open like small doors, each etched with a slice of the amphitheatre. Bays assigned, crews listed, deliveries pledged by dates that make optimism a kind of glue. The redemptores, contractors, wear clean hems and carry ink under their fingernails. Their business is to turn imperial will into schedules that can be fined. Behind them wait gang leaders from the collegia, carpenters, masons, smiths, men who speak tool first and price second. Beyond them, under the cypress shade, a group whose clothes do not quite match the city's. Tunics coarser, hair cut short without vanity, sandals borrowed, or bare feet toughened by distances. They are captives and convicts, and Rome's appetite counts them without saying their names. Spoils built this project. That is a sentence you can test in stone. Money from Judea runs through these tablets like a current, recorded on triumphal arches, murmured in markets, visible in the emperor's haste to give the city a gift with a short memory for Nero. Whether hands from Judea cut blocks here every day is documented less cleanly. Some will insist and point to chains and to common sense. Triumphant Rome did not let cheap strength idle. Others will answer that skilled work is gilded work, and you cannot teach a man who learned hills and olive groves to read a plumb in a week. Both speak truths. The site is braided labor. Captives haul and dig. Convicts push carts and clear spoil under guard. Hired daymen fight for the shovels. Guild craftsmen set joints and curves that will remember their pride longer than anyone remembers their names. Tension rises where these lines meet the day. At the spoil ramp on the north side, guards from the cohort sit their posts in leather stiff with oil, crests dusty, eyes doing the long-distance arithmetic of risk. A chain gang climbs, 2 by 2, iron biting ankles in the way a city bites a stranger. They carry baskets of rubble and broken brick, up and away to the dump, where yesterday will become next century's archaeology. The chain clicks when they turn, a sound that wants to become rhythm. The guards let it and keep their whips resting on their thighs, a choice as deliberate as drawing. One captive hums a phrase from a song that never learned Latin. A guard tells him to keep the tune and lose the words, then looks embarrassed at having admitted that a tune is a tune. Contractors live in a different weather. In the shade of a canvas awning, they bargain with the state's overseers. Prices swell with scarcity. Ash is dearer. Lime is dearer still. Rope is a tax all its own. An aedile's clerk quotes penalties for delays that feel like prophecies. The redemptor parries with talk of barges and wind and the cost of sailors who can tie a bowline without turning it into a prayer. Behind them, a boy wrings his rag and wipes the tables so figures won't smear into each other. A delivery of bricks stamped with a new yard's mark arrives at the wrong gate. The redemptor nods to a runner who corrects it before the clerk's schulus notices. This is the part of building where nothing weighs a pound and everything weighs everything. Centerpiece, a shift where all kinds of labor meet at one lift. A great tough block, destined for fill within a vault, where strength matters more than face, waits in a sling. The treadwheel crew breathe their steady hill. 2 freedmen at the levers call time in a dialect of grunts that has no grammar school and needs none. Beside them, a line of captives on a drag rope lean their body weight into a correction the captain wants gentle and true. A mason gestures from the scaffold with a plumb in his fist, like a small, thin priest. A carpenter wedges a post that tried to remember it was a tree. The block rises and swings, and for a heartbeat the only difference between men is what they are allowed to touch. A captive, broad-shouldered, shoulder scar turned silver by old sun, steps where told and does not look down. He watches the crane captain's hand, not the guard's. When the block centers over its bed, the captain lowers his palm as if smoothing a child's hair. The rope obeys. The captive takes slack with the rest and feels through hemp the moment weight decides it can be trusted. His chest loosens like a door that had been stuck. He does not say it, but the rope said "we" and meant it. Then the iron rings again, 2 taps, reminder and rank, and he returns to the spoil line with the same face he wore at dawn. In the stair corridors, guild work goes on with whispered rules. A stonecutter sharpens, a carpenter measures, a plasterer floats a scratch coat into a gritty, lunar skin. Joints are signed in ways only the initiated care about, a tiny nick that means "my square is honest," a faint ligature that tells a future repairer where to begin his faith. A freedman with a scar on his wrist, the permanent bracelet of a debt paid, teaches a boy how to carry 2 brick tiles like a book, not a burden. Flat child, flat, or the corners will cut your future. The boy laughs, and the freedman allows himself a smile that includes, briefly, every man he once envied. The truth of labor is not only in muscle, it lives in time borrowed, gour and time returned. A day's work is 9 hours by water clock if the sky behaves. Fewer if wind turns the valerium into a mouth that must be fed with hands. But the hours ride different backs. The chain gang's day is longer at both ends. The guards eat first and last. The wheel crew's day is shorter but steeper. Nobody lets tired legs argue with gravity. The contractor's day begins before dawn and ends after the last stylus pinch. He goes home with clean hands that ache more than they admit. The steward's day is woven through them all. Counting, smoothing, sometimes lying to tomorrow so today can put its head down. Honest uncertainty remains where records grow thin. Later penmen will argue totals and tones. How many captives, how long they stayed, whether they learned crafts or only bled, whether convicts built the underworld or only emptied it, whether the guilds resented the cheap hands or thanked them for the weight they spared. The site does not pronounce philosophy, it practices it. Hands that have not held a chisel hold a rope. Hands that have not held a rope hold a stylus. Together they persuade Stone and Time to stop pretending to be enemies. When the chain gang breaks for water, a guard removes a manacle to let a swollen ankle breathe. He does it because men with swollen ankles fall, and falling men drag other men down, and nobody wants to write that report. The captive nods once, not gratitude exactly, a transaction of breath. Down the corridor, the freedman showing the boy how to carry tile pauses, watches the small mercy, and looks away. He picks up his float and draws another line he plans to be proud of. Near sunset, a delegation passes along the podium seats, a priest of Jupiter, a magistrate with a neat beard, 2 scribes with bored ears. They do not speak to the chain gang. They do not need to. They speak to the contractor about omens and schedules. Thunder heard last night over the Esquiline, a statue's birdbath fouled in a way that worries old women and thus worries officials. The contractor says the masts held in the wind, and the arches did not complain. The priest says the auspices will be renewed at the gate tomorrow at dawn, to remind the city that plans ask permission from things larger than plans. The priest's hem brushes a fresh joint and takes a line of white. He does not notice. A boy sees it and laughs into his fist, then hides because laughter has contingencies. Night will bring wind and a forgotten wedge, and a lesson the sight will pay for in blood, but that is tomorrow's tally. Dawn carries a smell that workmen learn to name before they name the hour. Tar, a little sharp, hemp warmed early, lime still talking to water in the vaults. Calm begins with checks. Carpenters walk the scaffold with mallets and ears, tapping posts for the hollow note that betrays a crack, looking at wedges as if they could overhear their intentions. A wheel captain rubs grease into a sheave and wipes the axle with a strip of linen he keeps cleaner than his tunic. The foreman's first circuit is not for show. He stops at a mast shoe on the attic, lifts a finger toward a rigger, and the man answers with a new lashing before the finger finishes its speech. Below, the centering under a mid-tier vault waits for release. Yesterday the lead cured clean in the hidden clamps. The brick face rang true under the hammer's flat kiss. Now, little wedges will come out in a ritual that has turned more men into philosophers than any scroll in the form. Ease here, ease there, breathe. The carpenter at the king post sets his mallet and, because habit can be both wisdom and trap, glances once at the chalk tick he left yesterday, marked to show which wedge is last, not first. He nods to the boy who will fetch and carry and learn which breaths to hold. At the same hour, on the street below the Velia, a priest of Jupiter stands at a temporary altar with a white-fleeced sheep and a narrow-eyed augur beside him. The city asked for auspices because thunder walked the Esquiline in the night, and because officials sleep better when birds say yes. The augur lifts his crooked staff, the lituus, and frames the sky into a temple of air. He watches the flight lines of crows and pigeons, opens his ear to the direction of their wings, and looks satisfied with what he calls left and right. The butcher's boy on the site wall doesn't know left from ritual. He knows the wind is wrong for canvas and right for trouble. Back to the vault. Wedges begin their descent from shims to souvenirs. Tap, listen, tap, listen. The timber ribs ease. The vault accepts the compliment without flinching. The plumb bob in the foreman's hand forgets it was ever a pendulum. A chatter runs along the scaffold like a satisfied cat. The boy at the ladder gives himself a private nod. Then the little thing that changes how men remember a morning. Not a crack, not a shout, just a wedge that should have been marked and was not. It sits under a secondary post, no king, just a cousin. And because someone yesterday spoke 2 sentences at once, the chalk never learned where to live. When the mallet persuades it to move, the post asks a question of the load above it. The answer is a whisper in timber, then a murmur. A rib winks out of true by the width of a fingernail. That is enough. Tension arrives like weather. The carpenter's eyes go big without moving. He sets the mallet down as if it were a baby that might cry. Hold, the foreman says, and the word tries to be a net. Tailors on the nearest crane belay and lean back as if a rope can prop a thought. Men step away from edges and toward work at the same time, a trick only experience teaches. Centerpiece. The failure that is not spectacular, and so is more frightening. A ledger slips, a knee brace sighs, the rib settles as though sitting to think. A mason on the scaffold, young, quick, with that fearless economy good crews turn into pride, reaches for a wedge to tamp back in. He is in the right place for a hero, and the wrong place for a person. The rib's end skates on a post top, polished by 100 safe mornings and 1 unsafe one. The plank under the mason's knee jumps the width of a coin. He He snatches at air, finds rope, and for a heartbeat the amphitheater holds him with a hemp question mark. The rope burns. His palm opens because palms do. He falls a story and a half, rebounds off a ledger that tries to be kind, and lands on a bed of sand kept under the scaffold for exactly this reason. The breath leaves him like an animal escaping a trap. He does not scream. The air has other work. Somebody's cup hits wood and knocks. Everything stops without stopping. A wheel crew freezes in their stair-step of effort. A rigger stands with his foot in a loop, as if fastening a sandal to the sky. A lime cart creaks one syllable and grows silent as a temple. The foreman's voice finds a register that makes men turn without choosing to. The rib is dogged back with a double lashing. A pair of wedges become new truth where yesterday's truth forgot to attend. The vault, ashamed to have been dramatic, resumes being geometry. Only then do bodies move toward the boy on the sand. He is whiter than marble, and then pinker. He breathes with little barks. A woman from the ration shed arrives with a jar and the determinism of someone who has seen births and fevers and knows the grammar of a body and argument. She spreads honey on a cut that wants to go bad and binds it with linen that was a sleeve a moment ago. A carpenter's hand, gentle, huge, explores the ribs beneath the tunic with the same curiosity he uses for timber and stops when a hiss says, "Stop." Nothing broken that kills a morning, perhaps a fracture that will write weather in his bones. 4 men lift him with more tenderness than they bring to capitals and carry him to a shaded bench. Someone, not the foreman, puts 2 small bronze coins under a plank at his head. Not Charon's fare, not yet, but the old habit of paying the world to hold still. Rumor beats the augur to the gate. The priest's man arrives anyway, entrails story calm on his lips. The liver showed a bright lobe, auspicious. The skies left spoke clean. The tripudium, feed for the sacred chickens, fell in the right way. The foreman thanks him like he thanks rain. A rigger glances at the velarium and mutters that birds eat better than sailors when the wind picks up. The priest sets a sprig of laurel at the threshold and takes laurel away from a corbeille where someone stuck it. You do not invite thunder to climb wood. The price of height is written less in blood than in rules, and rules arrive quickly when blood has reminded men why. New marks appear on wedges, doubled and crossed. Boys are told with more sharpness and more kindness in the same breath that a ladder is not a thought you can edit later. A plank with a proud warp is demoted to a future floor and replaced with something that remembers flatness. Riggers retar a guy line that looked tired at breakfast. The steward opens a small coffer from the contractor. Money for the injured, not charity, with guilds and funerary clubs, collegia funeraticia, behind the words, to see that a man who falls still eats and is buried with his name, not a number. Omens keep their own ledger. A gust shoulders the velarium and then tires. A cloud paws at the sun and then forgives it. On the Palatine a dog howls, which is a proverb, not a prophecy. A runner from the slaughter yard by the forum passes word that an ox balked at the knife and had to be soothed with salt. A sign to some that game should be humane, a joke to others that oxen have learned politics. The architect, who trusts mathematics more than metaphors, orders extra guy lines for the western masts and a day's delay on easing the next centering. He writes it on a tablet where nobody can argue without using a stylus. By late light, the scaffold stands truer than it did at dawn, and the vault wears its dignity again. The boy on the bench sleeps, drugged by pain and exhaustion and honey. His friends have written his name on the plaster beside him, not for fame, for finding him in the crowd of tomorrow. The foreman walks the ring once more and lets his hand trail along stone as if checking a friend's fever. He pauses by the podium seats, now many, and the iron sockets that will carry a barrier when beasts forget contracts. He looks toward the arena's center, still earth, not yet sand, and his eyes measure distances beyond stone, trumpets, crowds, the hinge of a gate. Night brings a wind shift from the sea, the kind that dries canvas and quickens men. Somewhere near the Colossus, a crew begins to raise a framework for a temporary arch that will wear garlands thicker than scents. In the markets, perfumers boil resins. In the stables, grooms curry animals that do not know their future. The city inhales. At dawn, the word will come from the Palatine. The day for opening is named, and Titus means to keep it. Dawn hangs on the travertine like dew that has learned to shine. Calm begins with a hush that belongs only to first times. Outside the oval, streets knot and unknot as citizens follow painted numbers toward their arches. 80 mouths, each with a tablet above it, each an answer to the tessera a man holds in his palm. The tickets are shards of bone and pottery cut clean, stamped with a gate and a cuneus, sometimes with a row, little arguments with chaos that Rome has decided to win. Vendors sing bread to bread, oil to oil. A water seller rattles tin cups and laughs, because today thirst will pay him in gratitude, not coins alone. Within, the amphitheatre draws breath and holds it. The velarium is reefed for now, masts braced, sheet lines coiled like sleeping snakes along the attic walk. Below, the benches knit themselves in white and brown and dyed wool as the city sorts by habit and decree. Senators on the podium marble, where names have gone from ink to incision. Equestrians behind them in the 14 ranks, custom favors. Citizens in the middle, the many above, soldiers standing where orders will later need hands. Women high, by old practice hardened into rule. Foreign guests learn Roman geometry by sitting where a numbered shard tells them. The city watches them watch itself. Tension rises in the imperial passage where quiet has the density of incense. Titus walks with the calm of a man who understands that grace is a kind of policy. He is no longer the general in Judea, no longer the son under his father's shade. He is emperor, and the gift that empties Nero's lake and fills it with people is the argument his reign wants to make. Behind him, lictors with fasces move like punctuation. Ahead, the pulvinar, the imperial box, waits dressed in fabrics that brag without shouting. To one side, priests carry laurel and a dish for grain. To the other, an architect with a tablet recites facts sotto voce the way a father reminds a child of names before a dinner. The trumpet calls are not military today. They are invitations. 3 long notes ride the bowl and return as a softened braid. Down on the sand, which for this first opening is still only sand, honest and level, without the permanent underworks that Domitian will later insist upon, teams of attendants rake from last checks, tamp edges, smooth seams. The parapet at the podium has its posts and the taut netting that will teach lions manners when persuasion fails. In the corridors below the podium, handlers murmur to animals whose ears have learned geography without maps. Doors breathe, then close. Doors breathe again. Centerpiece, the first surge of spectacle, measured, precise, and calculated to feel like accident. A crier steps into the arena and names the day. He speaks of dedication and generosity, of 100 days of games the emperor has promised. Suetonius will later write the number. Martial will polish it into epigrams. You, here, feel it announced as a calendar that became a theater. The crowd answers with a shout that graduates from joy into roar in 2 heartbeats. Then the hunters come. Venatores in short tunics, legs netted against claws, spears balanced so light you suspect witchcraft. Gates lift, from pens hidden in the podium's curves. Animals enter the world like weather, leopards with shoulders like water, bears who look surprised to be anyone's plan, boars braided with muscle and old thorns. Sand becomes story. The dance is brutal and expert. Nets flash, weighted corners kissing dust, then air. Spears test ribs and luck. A handler slaps a shield to draw a cat's yellow engine away from a man who fell and got up as if joints were part of a contract. The crowd leans as one body. Sometimes mercy is policy, an animal spared to show an emperor's temperate hand. Sometimes extravagance plays God, a rare beast loosed and then recalled, while a scribe in the podium notes how much coin today's mercy has cost. Perfume rises at intervals, a thin sweetness from censers under the podium. Some say to please, some say to clean the air after a kill. Both can be true. Between bouts, the bowl learns its own voice. Vendors chant in counterpoint, water, dates, nuts glazed in honey. A child drops a fig and howls as if Rome had fallen. An old soldier laughs and gives him another. In the upper tiers, the wooden benches creak a civilization's contentment. On the podium marble, a senator blankly strokes the engraved letters of his own name and feels the odd humility of sitting where a city can see you be ordinary. Afternoon brings gladiators. The poem Martial will write will make names of them. Today they are men carrying reputations like shields. Rudiarii, those already freed by the wooden sword, parade to show a debt that tastefully never ends. Pairs are matched with the intelligence of a good story. Secutor smooth-helmed against Retiarius with his net and trident. Mormillo's crest like a fish's fin against a Thraex whose curved sword kisses angles differently. There are blunted drills first. Fencing that teaches anticipation with dignity. Then the real thing, where sand begins to memorize people. Two men circle until the air between them has a shape, a feint, a net that kisses a calf, a blade that learns a wrist. The loser raises two fingers if he still knows how. The emperor stands or does not. Mercy becomes a lesson. The hand that turns determines a future that feels moral, because spectacle needs that illusion to remain drinkable. Honest uncertainties walk the railings even today. A rumor nibbles along the podium that a demonstration with water will follow. The arena flooded shallow, boats like shields turned upside down, men with oars teaching the sand to doubt itself. Later writers will argue whether full naval battles ever lived under this oval, whether the engineering allowed it here or only in temporary basins like those Nero loved, and Augustus before him. For this inaugural series under Titus, some say there were staged water scenes, crocodiles shown and teased perhaps, or animals displayed on rafts. Others doubt. The floor before you is dry and strong. The plumbing Rome knows could wet it, but not yet as a sea. You leave the question where honest questions belong, at the edge of claim, flagged for weather. What no one doubts is the scale of generosity. Tokened food drops happen in pauses, mycelia tossed into the crowd, small gifts stamped with the emperor's profile, wooden counters redeemable for oil or grain, sometimes silver, sometimes trinkets that only rumor will turn into myth. A poor man catches one and looks at it like a seed. In the corridors, manner flows longer than usual. The basins at the lavatories are kept overflowing, a luxury the city notices with its hands. At dusk, naval veterans light the first ring of lamps under the arcades. The amber glow climbs the vaults as if returning home. As the sun leans, the velarium is loosed in wedges, not fully, enough to tell the light whose hour it is. Shade combs across the media cavea and finds the magistrate who earlier doubted its reach. He nods a private apology to physics. A cooler breeze fingers the masts and then remembers to travel down to throats. On the sand, a final pageant walks. Tableau from myths Rome keeps because empires need stories about monsters tamed. Perseus with a painted Medusa head, Hercules with a lion hide, Theseus without a labyrinth but with posture. It is theater in an amphitheater, and the crowd forgives the mismatch because the day has been generous. Even generosity has an edge. Word passes quietly along the podium that those pens below the seats, their stairs and galleries, their hinged doors, could do more. An engineer near the imperial box, calm, careful, Domitian's friend before the word friend is published, explains without asking to be heard that if the arena floor were raised and the earth beneath tamed into corridors, machines could lift beasts and scenery into the light as if the sand had learned to sprout doors. Titus nods because good ideas are a kind of worship. He looks at the oval still breathing and sees what the next rain might do to teach it deeper tricks. Evening makes a bowl of the sky. The last bout ends not with a death, but with two men lowering their weapons and looking at the emperor like a question. Titus lifts his hand, palm open. The crowd learns mercy again. Trumpets fold the day shut. The exits yawn and then manage themselves. Vomitoria proving their promise in orderly rivers of sandals and voices. Stair treads shining under dust as if light could remember how and where it fell. Outside, the city picks up its ordinary and tries it on to see if it still fits. On the sand, after the last footfalls, a handful of men rake circles where today's stories bled into dust. They work without speech. Under their tools, the floor looks young again. By morning, stakes will mark a new intent. Under Domitian, the earth beneath the arena will be taught to multiply. Morning returns to the oval as if nothing had happened. Calm begins with lines of string that insist otherwise. After Titus's opening, the amphitheater could have rested on its applause. Instead, under Domitian, stakes sprout in the arena like a surveyor's garden. The sand is scraped back in orderly lanes. The smell changes: damp earth, cut timber, hot iron, pitch. And the ground you watched receive men now learns to swallow them and give them back by design. Rome is about to teach the amphitheater a second body, a shadow self in wood and stone. The first cut bites deep. Crews score the arena's long axis and peel back layers until the oval shows its ribs. Concrete footings, drainage channels that have been doing their quiet work since foundation days, pockets of silt that remember storms. A ring of trench is opened just inside the podium wall, becoming the future corridor that will circumnavigate beneath the spectators. Broad enough for carts, high enough for a man carrying fate on his shoulders. From that ring, transverse cuts run inward like spokes. Cruise score the arena's long axis and peel back layers until the oval shows its ribs. Concrete footings, drainage channels that have been doing their quiet work since foundation days, pockets of silt that remember storms. A ring of trench is opened just inside the podium wall, becoming the future corridor that will circumnavigate beneath the spectators. From that ring, transverse cuts run inward like spokes. Plans on wax tablets travel to chalk on earth and then to string on stakes. Rectangles for cages, slots for lift towers, channels for water, niches for oil lamps, stairs that will remember how to be secret. Tension rises when wood enters the conversation. The Romans have tricks for underground, timbering that keeps walls from remembering they were once mud. Carpenters drive square piles where the soil sulks. They drop oak sleepers atop. They stand frames in rhythmic bays, their posts wedged against the cut earth, their ledgers bolted with iron that knows it will rust and does not resent the future. Planks line galleries to keep dust from behaving like a second weather. Above, the intact arena is a patient lid. Below, a grid grows, 2 levels in places crossed by a central spine. The word that will later settle in scholars' mouths is hypogeum, under earth, but here the workers call it what it is. Corridors, cages, rooms, windlasses, capstans, doors that go up. Centerpiece, a lift learns to move a life. The tower rises beneath a marked square of the arena floor, its posts of seasoned fir, mortised and lashed, braced with diagonal courage. At its heart slides a platform's frame, oak cheeks, crossbearers, a deck that will be skinned later with planks and straw to muffle the instant between surprise and roar. Below, a capstan waits, a horizontal axle with bars like outstretched arms. 8 men can shoulder those bars, 16 if spectacle demands speed. Ropes, hemp soaked in tallow and common prayers, wrap the drum, run up and over bronze-sleeved sheaves and down to the platform. A ratchet and pawl, iron teeth, and a will to live talk to the load in clicks. The first rehearsal is a secret that everyone hears. A handler leads a bull to a practice pen. A stout timber box, sides ribbed like a ship's hull, door hinged and barred with iron. Owls blink from the dark of cut earth and revise their opinion of day. The bull smells the boards and the men. He is not yet an enemy. He is a problem with eyes. Handlers are soft-footed and uncompromising. They guide him in with a pole and grain, then drop the bar like an answer. Above, the platform waits under its trap square, planks of the arena floor laid to pivot and rise on command. Their joints tight enough to keep rumor in but loose enough to become story. Walk. The capstan captain's word is a low tide. Men lean into the bars. The drum turns. Rope thrums. The platform lifts, and the tower answers with a deep wood-belly hum. At the trap, a latch snicks, and the square opens like a lid remembering a hinge. Sun pours down a shaft that had a moment ago been sand. The bull sees light and breathes a question that shakes dust free along the timbers. The platform climbs, slow, steady, the drum knocking once where a splice remembers being 2 ropes before becoming 1. Up, a hand's width from the surface. Hold. Handlers ready staffs at the lip. Now, push. The platform kisses level, the trap pedals lock into the deck, and a living animal arrives where a crowd thought they were looking at nothing but earth. It works. The men lower, grinning the way men grin at math that moved. The plow is eased with reverence. The capstan's bars are slid home. The platform descends into a corridor that smells of tallow, sawdust, fear, and dinner. Nearby, another tower is fitted not with a full platform, but with a sliding drawer. A narrow lift meant for scenic tricks and quick surprises. A rock that turns into a god. A shrub that becomes a hunter. A door that isn't. A scribe jots a note. Pegmata. Stage machines. The word comfy is jargon. He draws a little wedge to remind himself that counterweights can be friends when shoulders tire. The hypogeum learns to speak modular. Cages are standardized, so a door that opens left in one can be swapped for a right in another when a bull proves to be a left thinker. Door leaves get bronze-faced edges to survive teeth and tusk. Gate pins are tapered, so a man can seat them by feel in darkness as trumpets shout up above. Niches receive lamps, clay cups with bruised lips that will soot every lintel in a week. Bronze lamps in richer corners cast cleaner light but burn budgets faster. Water channels are taught to behave. Lines drop to sumps where a man with a bucket becomes a hero, then out through clay pipes to the drains. Everything under here looks like improvisation, and is, until it becomes tradition. Honest uncertainties walk with the carpenter's pencil. Later writers boast of naval reenactments. Some imagine the arena afloat under Titus. Others place them in basins before this underworld existed. Engineers down here snort at oceans and point at drains. One shakes a plank to show how even dampness harms a lift's temper. If water ever comes here, they say it will be in bowls and staged ponds, not a tide. You file the claim where it belongs, beside the smell of pitch and the evidence of powls that like dry teeth. Off the central spine, a room becomes a den for myths. Costume racks go up, helmets with crests like promises, boarskin mantles, painted masks that could teach a child to dream incorrectly for years. A table for glue and pigment acquires an edge sticky with flour paste and stories. A metal worker arrives with hinges that fold too smartly for ordinary doors. He has made a falling panel, a rising step, a pivot that will turn a rock into an entrance. He stamps nothing. His signature is applause happening at the right time. Not all learning is spectacle. A handler taught by scars shows a boy how to blindfold a cat with linen and confidence, how to pause until the animal believes darkness is resting, not threat. The boy nods and nods, gripping his staff as if it were a child he should not drop. A ropeman cautions a capstan crew, "Hear the powl. If it sings too fast, the story ends wrong." A mason points to the joists under a trap, then to his own knuckles. "When the grain lies thus, trust it. When it lies thus, add a plank and call me coward." As corridors knit, the amphitheatre's lungs change. Air learns to move along tunnels. Sounds learn to travel like messengers. Footfalls, animal breath, the croak of a carpenter's saw, the iron whisper of a blade honed for show and for the real. Above, the cavilla hears only occasional oddities, rattles, thuds, a brief square of light where sand was. Below, men speak more softly than they would outside, as if underground were closer to God's ears. Late in the day, the architect and Domitian steward walk the central spine with oil lamps and opinions. The steward counts jaw traps and powls as money. The architect counts shadow and timing as art. 3 lifts along the long axis, 2 each side of center, smaller drawers between, the architect says, tapping the post of a tower, as if it had volunteered. Capstans at the ends of the tunnels, men in shifts, so no crowd hears tired. The steward nods, sees grain accounts hiding inside rope coils, and dictates a note about rations for the underworld. More figs, less wine, for steadier hands. The last lamp is snuffed to test darkness. It is complete and instructive. Above, the arena floor looks like innocence. Below, a corridor breathes men's warm breath back to them and saves it for morning. At dawn, builders will skin the traps and lay sand, hiding the doors so cleanly that even confidence will be fooled when the ground opens under a lion's roar. Morning lays a thin brightness over sand smoothed last night until it forgot the day. Calm begins with a rehearsal that is not a rehearsal, because nothing here ever truly pretends. Below the floor, the underworld hums, powls checked, ropes warmed under calloused palms, lamps trimmed, traps skinned with fresh boards that know how to lie until the instant they must tell the truth. Above, benches breathe the cool that stone hoards for the patient. A sweep of the velarium is half raised, and waiting to learn whether the sun intends argument or conversation. You walk the ring once with the foreman whose hand has measured more joints than a clerk has counted coins. He does not look at the arena. He looks at the places where the arena meets everything that is not the arena. Thresholds, drain mouths, the delicate seam where marble kisses travertine without becoming it. He touches an iron socket at the podium parapet and feels the faint burr left by a file months ago. He smiles, because a burr this small means a young smith grew older in that hour. Far above, sailors move like brisk thoughts along the attic, testing halyards, licking a thumb to taste wind's mood. The building carries its people like a memory carries decisions, lightly but never loosely. Tension rises with a cue no trumpet blows. A door in the hypogeum whispers. A platform slides. A square of sand becomes a lid, remembering it has a hinge. From darkness, a stag steps into afternoon. Antlers gilded at the tips, not to flatter a god, but to help a crowd learn where to look. It is an old trick and a good one. The animal turns its long face to the bowl and breathes as if to ask how many skies a city can wear at once. The lift drops. Sand remembers smoothness. Somewhere in the shade, a boy catches his breath, not at the deer, but at the seam closing so cleanly that for a heartbeat he believes in magic, without resenting engineering. Centerpiece. You stand where no crowd does, in the narrow corridor between cages and capstans, and watch a machine become a story. A handler murmurs to a cat through linen. A rigger thumbs a splice and decides it can be trusted. A capstan captain lays his palm on the drum to feel heat, his other hand on the powl to hear faith. The platform rises again, this time a console of painted rock and shrub. that will be a hero's entrance. And you understand the other genius of the amphitheater, not merely that it can hold 100 truths at once, crowds, orders, breezes, shadows, but that it can hide them until the moment telling changes the day. The old builders knew temples, forums, baths. Here they made a different grammar: reveal, conceal, repeat, never stutter. Later ages will read the bowl as cruelty or as art, sometimes both, depending on which page of the calendar their eyes prefer. You, standing with mortar dust on your tongue and rope hair on your forearm, know a third truth. It is labor petrified into hospitality. Not kindness, hospitality, the city's decision to receive its own weight and the world's envy with something better than bellowing. The travertine learns names, the concrete learns patience, the marble learns to reflect faces back without mockery. The velarium learns manners, the stairs learn mercy, the drains learn honesty. These are not virtues you can chisel on a pedestal, yet they are the ones that allow pedestals to exist. There are things the stone will not say because they were never written into it, and things it will say because marks outlast mouths. Under the benches, scratched ligatures of guilds, a bent fish, a double letter, a tiny star. On a hidden bed, a notch that means my square is true. On lead poured over an iron dog, the faint ripple of cooling that tells a metalworker's hour. In the corridor, a boy's name where a man fell and later stood again. The letters already scuffed by the traffic of care. The amphitheater is a library of fingertips. It remembers every wedge that was marked and one that was not. Seasons begin their syllabus. Winter will drive wind under the awnings and rain along the cornices. Pitch will crack and ropes will sulk, and sailors will sing a different key to coax them. Summer will warm marble until robes learn to billow. The velarium will earn its salt. The steward will lengthen water lines and shorten arguments. Autumn will daub the air with fig and smoke and patience. Spring will threaten to teach the drains humility. Fires will be watched for, lightning counted, tremors whispered about by men who do not believe in omens until stone answers with a sound they cannot name. Time, larger than emperors, will do what time does. The amphitheater will keep its appointments with crowds for centuries, and then with weeds for a while. Iron will be eaten and remembered by stains. Clamps will be stolen. Lead will turn into coin and roofs somewhere else. Marble will be burned into lime when a later city chooses walls over benches. Yet even stripped, the ellipse will insist on itself. Pilgrims will walk its shadow and feel their stride fall into the meter of a plane whose music they do not need Latin to hum. And then, always, people. A mother will seat a child 2 stair flights higher than the day deserves and teach him the number on the arch. A vendor will learn which words travel best along a vault. A sailor will tie a knot on stone that pretends to be a mast and smile because land for a moment feels like a keel. A freed man will pause in a corridor, rest his back against a wall he helped plaster, and hear a cheer pour over him like water that forgot gravity. He will think, not in philosophy but in shoulder, that a day can be both heavy and worth it. If you listen hard enough, you can hear absent footsteps, yours among them, in the way the building breathes. Work has a soul when it remembers why it chose its tools. Here the tools were rope and lime, ash and oak, lead and iron, fingers and courage, patience and rules, and the small superstitions that keep rules from pretending they are gods. The amphitheater remembers all of this, not as a list, but as a habit. Precision with humility, spectacle with logistics, pride with ledger. Even the underworld will give up its secrets at last. Centuries ahead, men with candles and then with batteries will walk the hypogeum and stroke timbers turn to ghosts and say capstan and powell as if the words were pets. They will read brick stamps like dates of saints and chase drains with string to learn where rain used to think. Some will imagine seas here that never stood. Others will deny tricks that surely did. The building will forgive both and offer them a place to stand and argue well. Late light slides along the cavea and lays stripes across marble noses and bare knees. The velarium's hem flutters, then stills, a page corner deciding whether to be turned. Somewhere a final trap settles into sand with a sigh that sounds like the last word in a sentence that has taken generations to speak. Tomorrow will bring a different program and a different wind. The stone will adjust, as stone does, and keep what is worth keeping.